Hey guys, tonight we begin a gentle exploration of dawn at a Victorian post office, a sleepy world warmed by candlelight and the scent of old parchment. Imagine ink-stained fingers, the distant clatter of horse hooves, and the hush of sorting letters before the sun fully breaks. If you find yourself drawn in, please like and subscribe, only if it feels right, and drop your location and local time in the comments so we can build our global community. Now, dim your lights, flip on a gentle fan, and settle into your coziest spot. Let your shoulders soften as we prepare for something soothing, a journey where every creak of wood and whisper of paper fades into a lullaby. Soon, you'll feel a soft anticipation weaving through the quiet morning air. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first pale glimmer of dawn had broken upon the Thameside rooftops, the old post office stood in patient silence, its stone facade steeped in half-forgotten echoes of countless deliveries and dispatches. A thin veil of mist clung to the cobblestones, refracting the faintest traces of lamplight and lending a breathless hush to the world. It was during these liminal hours, when night lingered and day held its breath, that the postmaster made his slow, deliberate entrance. In his woolen greatcoat, the weight of countless mornings yet to come about him, he paused for a moment outside the yawning portal. Even the small iron lantern at his side, its wick smoldering low, seemed reluctant to disturb the comfort of the pre-dawn stillness. With a cautious gesture, he raised a cold, iron key from the folds of his waistcoat pocket. The key's patina hinted at generations of use, deep ridges smoothed by the thumbprints of his predecessors. He inserted it into the heavy wooden door, that sentinel of timber and iron, and turned it with a muted click. The lock yielded softly, allowing a slow creak as the massive oak door swung inward. No rush, no haste, only the faint echo of wood sliding against worn hinges. Outside, the mist curled into the threshold, as though curious to explore the cavernous interior where leather-bound ledgers lay waiting in orderly rows. Stepping across the threshold, the postmaster set down his lantern upon the stone floor. Every footfall was hushed, measured, as though the very stones themselves paused to hear the day's first steps. In a corner, several oil lamps rested on a low table, their glass chimneys dulled by the fine film of smoke left over from the previous evening's service. One by one, he took each lamp in hand, placing it upon a wooden stool and reaching for the trimming shears. The snip of the wick was faint but precise, away with the ragged ends, leaving only a neat cylinder ready to draw oil. He poured the golden liquid into the reservoir, watching it swirl about the base of the glass, then struck a long match upon the stone wall. The wick caught flame with a gentle flare, illuminating the room with a soft, rosy glow. Each lantern in turn yielded the same amber light, until the shadows that had gathered beneath high arches were banished, revealing time-worn counters, pigeonhole shelves, and the smooth expanse of a wide oak desk. At the center of this ordered chamber lay the leather-bound day ledger, its cover faded to a worn chestnut by decades of handling. He lifted it reverently, noting the subtle imprint of an earlier postmaster's initials on the spine. With a gentle inclination of his head, he opened the thick cover. The pages cracked softly, edges curled and browned like old parchment. In the pale lampglow, he ran his fingertip along the handwritten entries of weeks past, the looping script in ink still glossy, the neat columns of hours, names, and destinations a testament to methodical care. He paused at the last page, where the previous day's closing tally was inscribed in midnight blue ink. A small margin of empty space remained before the end of the binding, that was where his own careful pen would soon make its mark. A slender brass quill pen sat beside an inkpot of darkest black, its surface reflecting flickers of lamp flame. The postmaster dipped the quill, testing the flow on a scrap of surplus paper until the tip ran boldly with ink. He traced the date at the top of the page, October 14, 18, and paused. Outside, a faint chorus of birds announced themselves, their voices gathering strength as though preparing a dawn ritual of their own. The postmaster recorded the inventory of lamps trimmed, the chairs drawn out, the registers laid open. Each item was noted with care, as though the act of writing conferred a form of quiet ceremony upon the office itself. It was in these early rituals that the post office found its dignity. A distant rooster crowed, blending with the muted scrape of wooden chairs as the postmaster adjusted their positions for the coming day's clerks. His own boots scuffed the mottled stone floor. The sound was minimal, but it reminded him that he was no longer alone. From the inner corridor came a soft series of footsteps, likely the junior clerk, summoned by the first warming light of the lamps. With measured calm, the postmaster called a quiet greeting through the shadows, "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne." And in return, the light tap of slender shoes approached, the clerk's breath visible in the cool air. Together they began the final prelude to opening. A slender broom swept the last tendrils of dust from the corners, an oiled rag polished the brass fixtures of the scale, and a reservoir of ink was set upon the counter for ease of access. Behind the wrought iron grille that separated public space from private sanctum, rows of pigeonholes stood ready to receive the day's outflow of letters, each slot carefully labeled in copperplate with the names of London districts. A leather stamp pad, its surface indenting with the imprint of emblematic insignia, was placed within reach, alongside boxes of ivory stamps and packets of sealing wax. Outside the windows, the horizon hinted at pale apricot, the promise of sun rising. The postmaster paused to look up at the sky, the delicate haze parting like a gauze curtain. He felt the weight of tradition settle about his shoulders, woven from the labors of those who had tended these same lamps and opened these same ledgers for longer than memory could muster. The ritual was almost complete, keys placed upon the counter in a neat row, doors flung wide to admit fresh air, and the little bell above the front entrance readied for its first chime. At last, he stepped back. The oil lamps glowed placidly, casting an amber arc across the stone-tiled floor. The leather-bound ledger lay open to receive his preliminary notes. Chairs formed a gentle semicircle behind the counter. And in the hush before any customer arrived, the postmaster allowed himself a moment of reflective quiet. Here, in this interstice between night's embrace and day's bustle, the heart of the Victorian Post Office beat slow and sure. From this calm threshold, the pulse of communication would soon quicken, letters penned in distant homes, parcels sealed for distant ports, and telegrams awaiting urgent dispatch. But for now, it was enough to stand amidst the glow of lamps newly lit, inhaling the mingled scents of oil, leather, and ink, and to honor the pre-dawn ritual that had governed this venerable hall for as long as history could tell. Before the first pale shafts of dawn slide through the mullioned windows, the postman arrives at the rear entrance of the Victorian Post Office. A thin mist clings to the cobblestones, curling around iron lamp standards and dampening the leather straps of his satchel. The heavy door stands slightly ajar, left so by the night clerk who delivered the final telegrams by flickering lantern light. He pauses for a moment, fingertips brushing the cool wrought iron handle, exhaling a small cloud of breath that mingles with the morning chill. With a practiced pull, he swings the door inward, its ancient hinges groaning softly, and steps into the quiet gloom. In the shadowed interior, his lantern casts a pool of honeyed light upon the rough-hewn table at the room's center. The canvas sacks slumped across its surface look stark and heavy, as though the night itself has been poured into them. Each sack bears a crudely stamped code in faded black ink, initials of outlying villages and distant routes, applied in haste by lantern or candle. He sets his lantern down and, from within his satchel, withdraws a length of twine and a stout iron hook. Methodically, he seeks the first sack, for letters gathered from the stagecoach that rumbled through the mist hours ago, and lifts it by its stitched seam. The coarse fibers whisper beneath his gloved fingers, a soft, rattling undertone to the larger hush of the empty post office. He carries the sack to the stone counter, its weight resisting him slightly until he sets it down with gentle authority. For a moment, he stands still, listening to the building's vast silence, damp walls breathing in the cold, the distant drip of condensation on iron drip trays, the hollow echo of his own boots on flagstones. Then, producing his knife, he carefully unclasps the drawstring. The canvas gives way with a muted sigh, releasing the clustered forms of letters, small packages, and telegram pouches. He leans forward, the lantern's glow reaching into every fold and crevice, and begins to draw out the night's deliveries one by one. Each envelope is handled with deliberate slowness, leather-gloved fingertips brushing over postmarks and carefully looped script. From Heanor to Hatchford, from Littlebury Vale to the outskirts of Westmoreland, the names come alive beneath his gaze. He reads each stamp and date, those tiny circles of pressed brass, confirming that the mail has traveled through rails and roads, from coach saddlebags and railway vans, from footmen's rounds and distant telegraph relays. The postman's gloved hand pauses as he lifts a small letter sealed with crimson wax. The raised emblem of the crown is still warm to the touch, the clay seal bearing a new imprint left only yesterday. He delicately sets it aside in a neat pile, marking it as urgent correspondence for the morning's first coach. Between sacks, he returns to his daybook, a huge leather-bound ledger resting on a slanted lectern beside the table. The postman's quill, freshly cut from a goose feather, stands upright in its silver inkwell. With unwavering care, he dips its nib into the dark fluid and writes the day's date at the top of the page in precise copperplate. Beneath it, he records the code of the sack he has just emptied, noting in looping script the total number of letters removed. Each figure is traced 3 times before he moves on, to guard against error when the clerk later tallies the final accounts. These early entries are illuminated by the lantern's flame, the ink drying in soft patches that catch the light, as though the words themselves burn faintly upon the parchment. He steps back, allowing a breath to drift through his open coat, then returns to the sacks in order, next the sack from the northern coach, still bearing flecks of straw and horsehair, then the smaller pouch that arrived by foot messenger from the adjacent town. Some containers yield nothing more than a few bills and printed circulars, while others bulge with personal letters folded into creases that speak of long journeys. He pauses over one particularly full sack, kneading it gently to gauge its contents, careful not to disturb the arrangement of fragile pages within. The cloth is mottled with damp patches, the result of early morning dew seeping through the carriage floorboards. He lifts the bag and brushes a hand across its side, shaking out the worst of the moisture before setting it on the stone once more. When each sack has been emptied and its contents arranged in orderly heaps, letters for sorting, packages to be weighed, telegrams to be dispatched, the postman glances toward the mullioned windows. A thread of pale gold has begun to lace between the leaded panes. Through this sliver of dawn, he sees the rooflines of the town rooftops, the first chimney smoke drifting skyward, and the silhouette of the church spire catching the light. He exhales, savoring the moment when night yields to day, when the hushed arrivals of his vigil become the steady rhythm of daily business. Turning once more to his daybook, he inscribes the tallies for each sack, 22 for Heanor, 17 for Hatchford, 8 for Westmoreland letters, and so forth. For each sum, he pauses, allowing the ink to settle before closing the ledger to imprint a faint copper smell upon his gauntlet. This record will guide the morning clerk who follows, ensuring that not a single letter is overlooked in the bustle to come. Each entry is a promise kept to the people awaiting news of births, of condolences, of contracts, of declarations of love, and of the mundane yet vital instructions that bind families and businesses together across miles. With the ledger closed and the final sacks checked, the postman gathers the letters into shallow wooden trays, arranging them according to their next stage of distribution. The lantern flickers in its cradle as a slight draft stirs through the room, carrying with it scents of moss, soot, and ink. The sharp tang of metal from the hooks and weights mingles with the soft aroma of parchment, and in this mingling, the office seems to breathe. He straightens his coat, lifts the trays, and sets off down the corridor toward the sorting hall, his footsteps measured and sure. Behind him, the night sacks, now empty and flapping loosely at their seams, lie abandoned upon the stone counter, as if spent of purpose. Beyond the sorting hall, the larger room sleeps still. Desks stand ready with their stacks of undisturbed pigeonholes, and the postmaster's oil lamps await their morning trimming. But here, in the antechamber of night's final duties, the postman has completed his task. The preliminary inspection of night sacks is done, the tallies recorded, and the letters poised for the next deliberate cycle of distribution. As he moves on, the last echo of his boots fades, leaving the heavy wooden door to swing softly closed behind him, and the post office, at the threshold of dawn, slips a little closer to waking. A slender shaft of pale morning light seeped through the tall mullioned windows, its faint glow stretching across the stone-flagged floor in narrow bands. The post office lay hushed, save for the distant chiming of a church clock announcing the hour. In that quiet moment before movement fully stirred, the long day's task took shape in neat rows of wooden pigeonholes, each labeled with a district name in neat, black-painted letters. Ashford. Bradshaw. Collingwood. Dorking. Elmbridge. From these compartments, the lifeblood of the province, its messages, its confidences, its commerce, would flow outward again to every corner of the county. The postmaster, his coat still faintly scented by the oil lamp wick, stepped forward and pressed a gloved hand to the edge of the nearest pigeonhole. He drew in a quiet breath. Even before the first letter had been placed, the worn-wood held a subtle mustiness, a trace of long hours and countless missives pressed into their slots. Fine motes of dust floated in the beam of light, stirred only by the slightest draught that passed through the open door. Fingers brushed across the carved district name on the wood, as though greeting an old friend. Then, slowly, with a measured nod, he turned. At the center of the room, a shallow oak table bore the remains of the night's deliveries. Canvas mailbags, collapsed from their former fullness, lay draped across the grain. Their coarse cloth sides sagged, the iron eyes of their drawstrings glinting in the dawn. A young clerk knelt by the table, thumb and forefinger pressing against a bag's rough fabric, seeking to detect the presence of letters still hidden within. The clerk's leather-gloved hand slipped inside and retrieved a handful of envelopes, some sealed with neat wafers of crimson wax, others simply folded and crease-worn. Each bore a hand-scrawled address, the fountain of one poor soul's hopes, the testament of a mother's longing, the ledger of a merchant's commerce. For a time, the only sound was the soft scraping of quills as the postmaster recorded an initial tally in the daybook, the pen scratching and looping with deliberate care. Then, as though on a mute cue, the clerk rose, straightened his worn waistcoat, and approached the pigeonhole bank. He paused a moment, fingertips lingering against the polished wood, then bent to retrieve the first letter. A single envelope drifted free, its paper thin and the script faintly smudged by nighttime damp. He held it at eye level, tracing the address with slow reverence, Mrs. Eleanor Farnsworth, Elmbridge Cottage. Beside the cushion of wood carved with that same district name, he slipped it inside. A soft rustle followed as more envelopes were added, Gorham, Holcombe, Ivydale, each sliding with a barely audible sigh into its appointed slot. The room filled with the quiet murmur of paper shifting, wax seals brushing against parchment, folded corners easing past one another, 2 or 3 letters overlapping before settling into the back of their pigeonhole's narrow cradle. Here, every letter found its district, its rightful place. Ever so gradually, the table's canvas sacks emptied, their contents dispatched like seeds to be sown across the county. The postmaster moved from one end of the pigeonhole bank to the other, slowly inspecting the clerk's work. He lifted each compartment's lip in turn, counting the letters against his daybook. Holcombe, 37, he murmured, voice low and steady. Ivyton, 19. Collingwood, 42. Between each district, he pressed his palm to the wood, feeling its familiar warmth. Dust lay lightly on the script beside each label, the clerk's gloved thumb brushed it away as he read, sending tiny clouds of gray into the still air. Outside, the first rose-tinted rays of dawn unfurled across a slate roof and glimmered on a distant spire. A gentle wind stirred the trees beyond the leaded panes, and somewhere beyond the posting room's thick walls, a horse stamped in its stall. Yet inside, time moved with a calm deliberation. The pace was neither hurried nor idle, it was the measured rhythm of a centuries-old ritual, a silent ballet in which each envelope was both partner and prize. Moment by moment, the pigeonholes filled. Underneath them, slender wooden drawers remained empty and waiting, destined for parcels and bundles of newspapers later in the morning. But for now, the estate letters, the town letters, the humble and the grand, each found sanctuary here. A trio of envelopes bearing fine copperplate script for Windsor Manor rested side by side. Below them, a neat stack of business correspondence to the ironworks in Collingwood formed a modest, angular column. The clerk paused to rearrange them, aligning their spines flush with the pigeonhole's edge, lest any protrude and be damaged when the next hand reached inside. From his position near the window, the postmaster regarded the light shifting across the terrazzo floor. A solitary crow trilled its morning call, and a swallow wheeled above the unlit lamp brackets. The letters, now sorted, stood ready to depart, dispatched by couriers on foot, by rattling carts, by the great coach that would clatter away at breakfast. Yet in this moment they rested in perfect order, a testament to hours of care and the silent guardianship of the office. At the back of the room, a small stack of district guides lay atop a narrow ledge. Leather-bound, edged with gilt, each volume detailed the hamlets, the street names, the extended families known in its district. The postmaster drew one of them forth, Bradshaw, and opened to a page listing High Street, Lower Cottages, Old Mill Lane. He leaned close, reading the fine print with quiet attention, then closed the book as though cataloguing each place in his own heart. For every letter he sorted, he imagined the winding lanes of the district, the glow of cottage windows through that same morning mist. Slowly the room warmed beneath the growing sun, and the pallor of dawn deepened into a gentle gold. The clerk gathered the empty mailbags, shaking out the remaining scraps of parchment and casting them aside. He folded the cloth evenly and set the sacks near the door, ready for the coachman's later inspection. The pigeonholes, now filled, presented a mosaic of colors, the white of plain envelopes, the buff of business stationery, the pale blue of intimate letters, the occasional scarlet-backed sheet dispatching news by special messenger. It was a tapestry of private lives, all held together by the patient craft of sorting. In the distance, the muffled creak of wheels on cobblestones told of the first customers arriving, the baker seeking stamps for his account at the flour mill, the tailor bringing a note for the cloth merchant. But before the doors opened to the public, the morning's work had to be complete. The postmaster stepped back to survey the scene, the pigeonholes orderly, the letters secure, the clerk at ease. He nodded once and lifted a brass-handled bell with a single finger. Its chime rang out, soft yet clear, echoing through the vaulted arches. Above, the gloom of early dawn gave way to daylight, gilding the stained-glass panel above the door in rosy hues. Now the letters lay poised, each in its domain, ready to step into the world beyond the post office walls. The ritual of sorting at dawn was done. Soon, the next tasks would follow, the fastening of leather straps in preparation for departure, the steady clip-clop of horses on the yard stones, the final seal on the day's correspondence. But in this serene interval, all was still except for the gentle rustle of paper and the lingering hush of a house awakening. The turning of the day's first page had been completed, and the story of each letter was set to continue on its appointed course. A faint glow lingers on the eastern horizon as the postmaster steps into the carriage yard. The air is still cool, and every breath draws in the scent of damp earth and dew-soaked grass. Lanterns, hung from wrought iron brackets, cast small pools of trembling light upon cobblestones slick with overnight moisture. A solitary figure stands beside a gleaming mail coach, its polished wood dark and deep under the first slivers of dawn. The coachman, wrapped in a heavy woolen greatcoat, bends low to inspect the harness and the saddle hooks as though offering silent prayers to unseen deities of safe passage. Leather straps lie coiled upon a low wooden bench, thick and supple. Their buckles, brightened by recent polishing, catch the lantern beams with a metallic glint. Carefully, the coachman draws one strap across the sealed iron mailbox fixed to the coach's side, threading it through heavy rings, then looping it back and cinching tight. Each strap holds a promise, that letters and parcels bound for distant market towns will go unrelinquished, untouched by wind or rain. He moves deliberately, his fingers steady despite the chilly air. Behind him, the postmaster opens a small chest of brass-fastened pigeonholes, selecting each canvas sack in turn. The sacks, sewn of thick herringbone cloth, bulge gently with letters. The early morning shadows emphasize the rounded forms, like ready bellies waiting for a journey. One by one, the coachman hooks the sacks onto iron pegs along the coach's side, each clink of metal sounding loud in the hush. He steps back to test the security of each fastening, gives a light tug, then nods once before moving on. The rhythm of his work is unhurried, precise, no strap too loose, no buckle left unfastened. Just beyond the coach, horses stamp impatiently. Their nostrils flare white in the cold air, each exhale turns to mist, drifting upward to mingle with the lantern glow. Black mares and bays stand side by side, their harnesses laid out across stable rails. The coachman lifts each leather collar, brushes it lightly to ensure there is nowhere that might chafe sensitive skin, then fits it around a broad neck. The horses lower their heads, recognizing the familiar weight of harness and the gentle tug of the bit. The coachman whispers to them in soft tones, turning their heads this way and that to settle the bridles. A stable boy approaches with a sponge, gently wiping the sweat of last night's exercise from between the flank and the harness strap. The horses sniff the air, ears swiveling to some distant sound, a roosting bird, the creak of a distant gate. With the mail coach ready on one side, the postmaster turns to a smaller two-wheeled conveyance used for nearer villages. Leather pouches, marked with chalk indicating the proper route, hang neatly on pegs. He unclasps each pouch, lifts its flap, and lightly fluffs the pale liners within so that the letters inside lie smoothly, without folds that might render the contents unreadable. He places each back on its hook with care. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock tolls the hour, its low, sonorous tone reverberating through the yard. The coachman, now having attached reins and checked the wheel spokes for any looseness, steps onto the driver's box perched above the left rear wheel. He calls out in a voice that is at once measured and clear, "All ready." Immediately, two stable hands spring forward. One lifts a heavy leather trunk, sealed with the insignia of the post office and heavy enough to test the strong arm of any helper, and passes it upward. It lands with a soft thud atop the roof of the coach before being secured by a final set of iron rods. The other man steps to a folded wooden ramp, extends it to bridge the gap between ground and roof, then crowds it flat once the trunk is in place. Meanwhile, inside the office beyond a curtained hatch, the postmaster watches through leaded glass. His reflection overlays the mail coach, merging with the scene outside. In his hand, he holds a small scroll on which the first wave of destinations is listed: Brimshire, Lineford, Kelstone, and Haverford. Each name carries its own dignity, its own quiet expectation. He checks them off one by one as the coachman's assistant affixes dispatch stamps in indelible ink to the canvas sacks. The coachman lifts a brass horn to his lips and sounds three low, steady notes. The fog seems to shiver at the call. Soft footsteps echo as one final clerk emerges from the sorting room, carrying the daybook. He stands on the threshold, pen tucked behind his ear. The postmaster runs a gloved finger down the page, confirming the number of sacks loaded and the weight of the trunks. He nods, the coachman returns the daybook, its back brushing against worn stone. Then an almost reverent moment of silence passes. From the corner of the yard, distant horses in a neighboring stable whinny gently, and the faint rattle of distant carts blends with the sound of breeze stirring the tip of a nearby elm. The coachman lifts himself to the seat, grasps the reins with gloved hands, and settles into place. The horses shift their weight, and the coach trembles on its springs. Softly, as though easing a great burden into motion, the coachman lifts his whip. The horses rear slightly, then step forward, harness straps creaking in a measured cadence. A stable boy hurries to slide the wooden ramp clear. The assistant with the trunk straightens from his kneeling posture and salutes the departing driver with his cap in hand. Nearby, the postmaster steps from the porch, his silhouette framed by the dark doorway. Through the panes of glass, the lantern lights glow as small, steadfast points against gathering daylight. The coach begins its steady roll, rubber-tipped wheels turning first with quiet deliberation, then picking up speed as the horses find their rhythm on the cobbles. A low rumble follows them, like the distant surf of a returning tide. Twice more the coachman sounds his horn, bright and clear. The sound carries through the morning air, flutters around the surrounding rooftops, and fades beyond the high stone walls of the town. The postmaster stands motionless until the last spike of wheel iron passes beyond view. Then, he draws in a slow breath and turns back toward the offices, where the glow of oil lamps is dimming now that dawn's pale light has found every corner. He brushes the brim of his hat, smoothing the wool, and walks back into the hall, each footstep soft on stone. The hush deepens. Papers lie on the sorting table, still waiting to be stamped and sealed for the next dispatch. The echo of the departing coach remains upon the walls, a final goodbye. Within the hush that follows the coach's departure, the postmaster pauses beneath a lofty arch. Sunlight, now stronger, begins to filter through stained-glass windows high above, tracing colored shapes on the tiled floor. He gazes upward at the carved capitals of columns, wrought in a style faithful to the grand buildings of the metropolis. Shafts of light slant in, illuminating motes of dust that drift like motes of memory through the silent hall. It is in this still moment, bathed in new-day glow and left in gentle quiet, that he gathers himself for the tasks ahead. Though the first departure has rumbled away, a full day of correspondences, tokens of far-flung lives, and messages of hope and longing awaits. The echo of hooves fades entirely, leaving behind only the quiet dignity of an institution dedicated to connecting one soul to another, across fields, towns, and time itself. And so, Chapter 4 closes with the postmaster's steady steps leading to the vaulted interior, where every column and counter will soon stir with the hushed fervor of morning duties. The early bustle of harnessed horses and rattling mail coaches has departed now, leaving the post office in a suspended moment of calm. Inside, the silence is almost reverent, broken only by distant echoes of leather boots on stone and the faint ticking of a brass clock mounted high upon the far wall. It is in this hush, between the departure of the first coach and the arrival of the morning's first customers, that the postmaster allows himself a rare pause. He settles upon a low bench beside one of the great stone counters, bench and counter alike shaped by generations of use, closing his eyes to drink in the quiet dignity of the place. Sunlight slips through the lofty arches above, threading its way across the chamber in broad bands of gentle warmth. Each beam reveals a universe of dust motes, drifting lazily as though unconcerned with time. The motes swirl in concentric eddies around the carved capitals of pillars that rise from the tiled floor like ancient sentinels. Their capitals are fashioned in carefully hewn stone, vine leaves curling around a central rosette, each petal and tendril still crisp despite the centuries. Shadows and light chase one another among these forms, lending them an almost living quality, as though at any moment they might stir and breathe. The counters themselves stand in long, somber rows. Centuries of folded letters and pressed palms have polished the edges of the stone until they glow softly, worn smooth as river stones. The surface is cool to the touch, its faint veins of iron and quartz glimmering in the sun's partial glow. Alongside these bowed slabs of gray lie inlaid wooden ledges, dark oak panels spliced by delicate marquetry. Tiny brass insets mark intervals of measurement, once used to assess the length of a letter's edge. Now, in the postmaster's stillness, they catch the light and flicker like half-remembered secrets. Above his head, a stained-glass window arches against the pale plaster of the wall. Its jewel-like panes form a quiet tapestry of muted scarlets and viridian, amber and deep sapphire. In the center, a heraldic device, crossed post horns entwined with laurel, beneath a crown of oak leaves. No longer vivid, these colors have mellowed with time, yet they still cast a broken rainbow upon the encaustic tiles below. The tiles form intricate patterns of hexagons and stars, each floor bored a fragment of a larger mosaic. Here and there, scuffs betray the passage of mules laden with mailbags, the skirting boards bear faint rub marks from broom handles and the gentle sweep of countless feet. But mostly, the floor is unapologetically quiet, a tapestry beneath the sunbeams that beckons the eye to wander. The postmaster's gaze drifts upward, tracing the curve of the vaults. Timber beams, darkened by age, intersect in a network of laths, bearers of a vast roof more than half hidden by the shadows. On each beam is carved an inscription, the date of construction, the names of benefactors, and a brief motto in Latin extolling Industria et Fidelitas, industry and fidelity. He recalls the day those beams were hoisted into place, when the townsfolk gathered in the square to witness the masons, their faces bright with hope that this building might endure as a bulwark of communication between near and distant shores. Along the north wall stands a row of narrow alcoves, each housing leather-bound ledgers arranged like silent sentinels. Their spines, stamped in gold leaf, bear the names of every postmaster who has signed these pages. The volumes are heavy, the leather smooth and supple, with the occasional crack where a record was opened in winter by harsh hands. The postmaster's own ledger sits longest and thickest among them. He lifts it from its place with reverence, running his thumb along the gilded title before replacing it. Even the simple act of returning the book to its shelf feels akin to slipping a key into a lock, a small ritual of continuity. From a coffer high on the wall, he retrieves a narrow wedge of brass, an old key to a half-forgotten pigeonhole once used for private correspondence. He fits it into the lock of a small door beneath the counter, turning it until it clicks and yields. Within is a secret compartment no larger than a shoebox, meant for messages requiring special discretion. The lid is lined with velvet, deep burgundy almost black, and as he parts it open a faint scent of laurel oil rises, mingling with the musk of old wood. It is here, on obscure mornings such as this, that the weight of centuries feels heaviest. Turning once more to survey the interior, the postmaster notices the wrought iron gratings that guard the telegraph room's vantage. Each iron bar is twisted by hand into graceful spirals, terminating in scrolled flourishes that echo the vine carvings below. Through the open arch, he glimpses the operator's bench, the gleam of brass instruments and the spool of paper tape, silent between the rapid clicks of the Morse key. Soon enough that quiet will be interrupted by urgent whispers and the hum of batteries, but for now it remains serene, a companion in this reverie. At his feet lies a pile of old floor plans, yellowed maps of the building drawn when it first opened, blueprints that marked each arch, corridor, and secret passage. He lifts one, smoothing its crease, and studies the margin notes written by the original architect, a certain Mr. Edwin Carr, whose delicate penmanship still holds steadiness. Marginalia speak of roof repairs due in the year 1841, of a misplaced beam discovered during the first winter, of a budget shortfall met by local merchants. These scraps of annotation impart a human heartbeat to the stone and timber, a reminder that this hall exists because of hope, necessity, and communal effort. Softly, the postmaster rises. He steps from the bench, pacing slowly toward the center of the hall as though feeling the pulse of all who have come before him. His boots release a hollow echo among the columns. He imagines the earliest clerks in brown frock coats, balancing quills over parchment while footmen waited anxiously outside. He hears, only in his mind's ear, the jingle of coins exchanged, the murmur of travelers pausing to entrust letters bound for home. He senses the breath of wind that once blew through a gap in the western window, scattering stray receipts across a counter, a breeze carried on the back of a weary messenger riding from the coast. Sunlight continues to slide across the floor, lengthening the shadows beneath each pillar. A single motet of color from the stained glass pools by the exit, as though marshalling the last of its energy before the next bell summons activity. The postmaster draws in a slow breath and lets it out in a whisper, feeling the stone under his palms, the polished wood under his fingers. He knows that soon enough the bell will ring, the doors will swing open, and the post office will once again become a hive of measured motion and polite exchange. But for this fleeting moment, he allows his mind to roam among the details, the curve of an arch, the gloss of a pane, the grain of an oak beam. He savors the stillness and the memory embedded in every surface. In these stones and timbers lies a chronicle no ledger could capture, the silent witness of comings and goings, of letters that carried laughter or tears, of hope dispatched across valleys and rivers. As the sun climbs higher, the dust motes begin to settle, and the postmaster, with one final look, moves toward the counter once more. Soon the ledger will open, the ink will flow, and the post office will breathe again with life. Yet in his heart he carries this tranquil hour, this architectural reverie, knowing it endures beyond every departure and arrival. A single, clear note rings out across the hushed hall, pure and resonant, as the brass bell above the heavy oak door gives voice to the morning. It is the first welcome of business, the moment when the post office shifts from private ritual to public service. Outside, the lamps have burned low in their oil troughs, the horses in the yard have been fed and stabled for the day's work, and the final echoes of the coachman's farewell have drifted down the narrow street. Inside, the postmaster stands behind the worn stone counter, the patina of countless dawns glowing warmly in the new sunlight. His fingertips rest lightly on the ledger, ready to record names and duties, but in this instant he watches the door's gentle sway, savoring the quiet promise carried in that delicate tinkle. The first customer is a grocer's assistant, his cap pulled low, cheeks ruddy from the chill of early morning air. Sunlight slants through the mullioned window at his back, illuminating specks of dust that drift like motes of gold in a cathedral shaft. He steps forward with a careful gait, carrying a small bundle of letters addressed to suppliers in the next town. His gloved hand taps on the counter, the sound a muted punctuation in the gathering warmth. The postmaster raises his gaze, offers a brief nod of greeting, and sets aside the ledger with deliberate calm. He reaches for the weighing scales and the rate table, though he will not need them. This is a collection of prepaid letters, their stamps already affixed by the grocer's household. Still, the ritual must be observed. The postmaster places the stack upon the wide scales, watches the beam settle, and transfers the envelopes one by one into a clean canvas sack. Each letter is noted in the daybook with a graceful flick of quill, the ink's deep black forming a steady record for the hour. Then, with a gracious inclining of his head, he returns the sealed sack to the grocer's assistant, who lifts it gently and retreats through the door, its bell chiming once more. It is nearly 8:15 when the next figure crosses the threshold, a merchant in a dark frock coat, silk cravat neatly tied, and a gleaming top hat carried straight in his free hand. He pauses beneath the stained glass window, where pale reds and greens cast muted color upon the polished tile floor. With careful fingers, he unwraps a small leather pouch, revealing a few copper pennies and the promise of correspondence. "Good morning," he intones, voice low and courteous. "A book of stamps, if you please." The request is simple, yet momentous. A book of stamps is the merchant's key to distant partners, to ledgers balanced and accounts settled. The postmaster retrieves a slender, bound booklet from the shelf behind him. Its cover bears the crown's crest, embossed in gilt, a reminder of the service's authority. He opens the book at its first page, where the perforated stamps lie in neat rows, waiting like soldiers on parade. With steady hands he tears free 4 sheets, then 8 more, until he counts exactly the number the merchant needs. As each stamp is parted from its neighbors, the faint tearing sound echoes under the high arches. He lays them on the counter in a tidy stack. The merchant produces a small notebook, flips to a blank page, and writes the total due in precise script. Copper coins clink softly as he pays, one by one, and the postmaster slides the stamps into a tiny envelope before sealing it. Then he reaches across the cold stone surface to lift his brass date stamp. Pressing it firmly against the envelope's front, he leaves an impression so crisp and even that the merchant's eyes narrow in appreciation. The seal of the post office, the date in neat Roman numerals, these marks guarantee that the stamps were issued this very morning, at exactly 8:15. The merchant tucks the packet into his coat, gives a curt nod, and exits, leaving the office to echoes of polished leather boots on flagstones. In the interval before the next arrival, the postmaster straightens his ledger, aligns the quills in their inkwell stand, and inhales the lingering scent of stamped paper and oiled wood. Through the arched entrance, he can see the faint plume of white steam rising as a kettle boils in the back room. Tea will be brewing soon for the junior clerks. A gentle warmth spreads across the hearth tiles, though the hearth itself lies cold. The postmaster's thoughts drift momentarily to the stained glass panels overhead and the carved pillars that stand guard beside them, silent witnesses to each dawn's ceremony. He recalls how, only moments ago, the first coach rolled down the street, horses clattering on cobbles, bound for distant villages, chapter 4 now receding into memory. Then came his quiet reverie among the lofty arches, chapter 5, reminding him that the building itself is as much a repository of stories as the letters and parcels that pass through. A trim young woman in a lavender gown arrives next, carrying a single letter, light and surprising amidst the stacks of official dispatches. She waits politely in the narrow aisle beside the counter. The bell rings again as the door swings inward, and the postmaster greets her with a soft, "Good morning, madam." She places the letter gently atop the counter, her gloved hand fluttering to hold the collar of her cloak. It bears the ornate handwriting of a distant cousin, she explains shyly, and she wishes to prepay the postage so her kin will not need to settle for unpaid delivery. The postmaster, with unhurried precision, weighs the envelope on the penny scales, consults the rate table bound in sturdy leather, and calculates the fee. A quill dips into the inkwell, and he records the transaction alongside her name. He removes the slim green postage stamp, moistens its reverse under a fine penknife's edge, and secures it to the upper right corner of the envelope. Then he affixes a small crimson postmark, its letters crisp and upright, the date, the hour, the office's official cipher. The lady inclines her head gratefully, tucks the stamped letter into a reticule, and with a final, "Thank you," she departs, the bell sounding her farewell. As the half-hour progresses, 2 more customers arrive in quick succession, the town schoolmaster seeking postcards for his students, and a button merchant from across the square, with a leather-bound bundle of correspondence for far-off wholesalers. Each request is met with the same deliberate ceremony. Postcards are counted and sold in sets of 12, the schoolmaster's name entered in the daybook, the bundle of letters is weighed, sealed in greaseproof paper, labeled with destination stamps, and slotted into the outgoing mail chest. Through these measured rhythms, the postmaster ensures that no detail is overlooked, no letter misplaced. By 9 o'clock, the lobby begins to fill with a gentle murmur as folk leave the post office to continue their own rounds, bakers, blacksmiths, and seamstresses, all subject to the steady cadence of the service. Outside, the morning sun climbs higher, brushing the facade with pale gold. Within, the postmaster pauses for a moment and surveys the scene, a scattering of red ink stamps, a row of neat parcels by the hatch, the pigeons perched on ledges outside, and the lingering aroma of ink. In the distance, the next stage of the day awaits, Chapter 7, where scales will balance weights against rates, and clerks will record each fee with quill and ledger. But for now, in this moment between opening bell and midday bustle, there is only calm efficiency and the promise of communication carried on paper wings. He closes the daybook gently, extricates his quill from the inkwell, and leans back against the counter. The bell, silent now, seems to sleep above the door until it is next needed. Yet even in its quiet, it is the keeper of beginnings, each tinkle a threshold crossed. And so, with composed breath, the postmaster stands ready for the next chime, the next merchant, the next letter, ever guiding the flow of small wonders through this venerable hall. By the time the morning sun had climbed a little higher, its pale rays spilling across the worn stone threshold, the post office had moved into the rhythm of fiscal duty. At one end of the long counter stood the brass postal scales, polished by years of careful handling until their polished surfaces gleamed with a soft golden light. Each scale pan hung perfectly level, suspended from slender arms engraved with the crest of the postal service, an eagle in flight above a crowned shield. The clerk approached these scales with measured steps, as though approaching a confidant, and placed a neat stack of letters upon the left pan. A weight, carved from solid brass and shaped like a squat cylinder, was added to the opposite pan, its surface cool and heavy beneath the clerk's fingertips. Slowly, ever so slowly, the clerk eased the weight along the arm until the pans balanced, the beam horizontal. Before him lay the leather-bound rate table, its cover stamped with gilt letters that read, "Postage Rates and Regulations." He opened the book to a page edged in faint crimson ink, where neat columns detailed the fees for local letters by weight, up to half an ounce, a halfpenny, half to 1 ounce, a penny, and beyond, incremental pence for each additional half ounce. Further along the page, separate sections described inland letters to distant counties, foreign correspondence, and printed matter such as newspapers or circulars. The clerk kept a slender bone folder at his side for turning pages without smudging the script, and he ran a gloved finger down the column until he found the appropriate entry. A farmer from the neighboring parish stepped forward, hat in hand, carrying a stout envelope sealed with red wax. The clerk unsealed the flap, slipped a single sheet of paper free, and weighed it on the scales to confirm its category. Finding it under half an ounce, he consulted the rate book, halfpenny. With deliberate care he lifted a quill, a goose feather sharpened to a fine point, dipped it into a glass inkwell, and touched it to the ledger's ruled page. A small black dot bloomed, followed by a looped F as he inscribed the farmer's name, the date, the destination, and, finally, the fee, 1/2 D. The quill scratched softly in the hush of the room, as if whispering secrets only the paper could comprehend. Across the counter sat a young lady in a lavender bonnet, clutching a stack of postcards. The clerk balanced the postcards together, noting with precision that their collective weight required a full penny's worth of postage each. He ran a fingerprint across the rate table's margin, where a varnished strip of wax protected the most frequently consulted entries, and discovered the figure. Again he dipped the quill, shook off the excess ink with a gentle blow, and traced neat numerals beside her name in the ledger. The sound of the quill against the parchment echoed faintly, a soft reminder of each small transaction that formed the lifeblood of the postal system. Behind them, other clerks moved quietly from counter to desk. A junior assistant carried a leather satchel brimming with coins, coppers, nickels, and the occasional silver threepence, arranged on a small polished wood tray. As each fee was noted in the daybook, a coin was selected, counted out in the customer's cupped palm, and replaced in the drawer. The quiet clink of metal on metal was almost rhythmic, a gentle footfall beneath the deeper undertones of ledger writing and distant foot traffic. A gentleman in a frock coat approached next, wishing to send a parcel bound for Scotland. The scales were adjusted to receive a small woolen bundle tied in twine. Once the weight was determined, 2 ounces and a fraction, the clerk turned back to the rate table for county packets, where fees were quoted by the ounce. Running his finger down 3 rows, he paused at 2 ounces, 2D, and copied the rate to the ledger. He then produced a length of red sealing tape, pressed firmly across the parcel's fold, and stamped its edge with the postal seal. The parcel was now an official charge upon the service, recorded and ready for the next coach. Throughout the morning the post office filled with a murmur of low voices and soft footsteps. Every so often the brass scales would ring with a faint tone as they settled, or a clerk would adjust a weight with a hushed metallic click. The oil lamps overhead, once lit at dawn, still burned in tall glass chimneys, casting an amber glow across the marble countertop. Their wicks curled in gentle spirals of smoke, lending a faint scent of bayberry and tallow to the air. The ledger itself grew steadily heavier. Pages of fine lines were scored with names, destinations, weights, and sums of money. The clerk paused from time to time to lift his head and glance out through the mullioned window, where shafts of sunlight revealed motes drifting in the air. Beyond, the street lay quiet but for the distant clip-clop of horses impatient to depart. Knowing that the fiscal morning must conclude before the second coach arrived, the clerks maintained their composed diligence, checked and rechecked their calculations, and ensured every entry was flawless. Midway through the session, the postmaster himself passed by, adjusting his spectacles and surveying the ledgers. He reached out to straighten a slightly askew page, then nodded approvingly at the clerk's neat script. At this silent commendation, the clerk allowed himself the barest of smiles before gathering the quill and continuing the next line of figures. As the hour approached the half past, the final customers queued to have their letters weighed and their fees recorded. One by one, they presented their missives, tidy sheets of correspondence, small parcels wrapped in brown paper, even a solitary newspaper wrapper marked, Press, 1/2 D. Each was measured, matched to the rate table, entered into the daybook, and sealed with a wax stamp. Eventually, the line shortened until only the clerk at the scales remained, gently replacing the brass weight on its rack and closing the leather tome of rates with a subdued thump. He paused then, turning to sweep his quill aside and study the completed ledger. Thousands of numbers lay in regimented rows, each marking a single act of connection between sender and recipient. Money, for all its mundane nature, was here a silent testament to the bonds of family, friendship, and commerce. In that quiet moment, the post office breathed as one living mechanism, its heart beating to the pulse of scales and scrips and coins. Beyond the counter, the telegraph key offered a subdued tapping from the adjacent office, hinting at messages hurtling along unseen wires. In a few hours, the second coach would arrive, discharging fresh sacks of mail that would flow into the pigeonholes and through the scales once more. But for now, the accounts of this morning's labors lay complete, and the fiscal foundations had been laid for every letter, package, and telegram that would follow. The clerk closed the daybook gently, lifted the brass lantern to his desk, and waited for the next chapter of the Victorian Post Office to unfold. A low wooden door, set into an oak-paneled wall, swings open on silent leather hinges. Through the threshold comes the faint scent of acid and oil, mingling with the dust of aged papers and the faintest trace of metallic tang from hundreds of feet of copper wire. In this small, adjacent chamber off the main sorting hall, the telegraph office lies hushed under a single flickering oil lamp. The lamp perches upon a narrow worktable, its flicker revealing dark green battery jars lined up on a shelf beneath a frosted glass window that bears the gilt words, Telegraph Office. The operator sits behind a stout mahogany desk whose surface is perforated by cable holes and polished by years of careful elbow rests. A stout brass key, gleaming against a backdrop of leather-bound logbooks, awaits his touch. Around him, a series of relay keys snap softly in and out of engagement, each one clicking in measured rhythm as current pulses along wires that stretch unseen toward distant towns and cities. One moment, they fall silent, the next, they snap to life with the telltale click-click that has come to mean communication more urgent than ink on paper. He takes a deep breath. Behind his neatly rolled-up sleeves, forearms bear the faint smudges of solder and graphite. A red-sealed cable runs along the baseboard, disappearing through a narrow port in the wall. In that same moment, from beyond the door, the faint scrape of a broom reminds him of the world outside, where clerks weigh letters and seal envelopes. Here, time seems to hang in the space between dots and dashes. A message arrives. The relay key, fed by a row of gravity cells, begins to hum in gentle resonance. The operator's eyes flick to the sounder, a small, black iron box with twin armatures that tap the top of its case in response to the incoming impulses. Tape unspools from a narrow slot, thin as ribbon yet tough as parchment, feeding across a pair of brass rollers. Each dot sounds like a single fingertip rap, each dash a sustained rattle. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 the hum grows into a steady Morse sequence. With a practiced hand, he guides the tape beneath a small carbide lamp on the desk's lip. A slender pair of nippers rests beside him. He snaps the incoming tape into neat segments, each line marked out with thin pencil strokes at fixed intervals. His eyes, calm and unwavering, follow every beat. There is no haste here, only a quiet devotion to accuracy. Every dot he hears must become a dot on paper. Every dash, a dash. When the unspooling ceases, the operator leans forward. He picks up the clipped strip with tongs, metal tweezers designed to keep inked hands clear of delicate tape, and sets it into a small wooden tray. There he deciphers the sequence in long, looping script, the date, the hour, the sender's initials, the message. This is not the sort of work one leaves to memory alone. Each sequence must be transcribed, filed, and dispatched in perfect fidelity. Mistakes at this post can mean delays that ripple across counties. Once the message is recorded in a slender, ruled telegraph ledger, another waiting moment falls. The operator checks the battery jars. With a quiet click, he lifts each glass cell from its wooden cradle. The acid within sloshes gently, and he tilts the jar to read the specific gravity, then returns it with the gentlest set down. Aside the cells is a small soldering iron, its bit still warm from earlier adjustments to a loose connection under the desk. Nearby, a coil of insulated wire lies curled like a silent serpent, awaiting its turn in future repairs. A second dispatch arrives from the countryside station 40 miles north. The sounder titters in a staccato rhythm, quickening as the station's operator, likely leaning at his own rack of batteries, feeds the message across the stretch of iron and copper that binds them. In the flicker of the oil lamp, the telegraph operator sees the shadows of his own fingers dance across the key. He flexes his wrist, brings the padded side of his middle finger to the brass paddle, and allows his memory to guide the measured strokes that will echo the countryside's dispatch. Tap, dash, tap, dash, tap. He transcribes it line by line, eyes tracing the shapes of dots and dashes as though they were notes on a musical stave. Each dispatch is stamped in the ledger, AM or PM, the deferred fee noted in neat script alongside. Some messages bear the urgent word immediate in margin red, others are routine inquiries, commodity prices, train arrivals, weather reports from the shipping ports. But even the most prosaic report is given its due solemnity. The wires may hum with the urgent strain of war dispatches or stock quotations, but here in this wood-paneled room, the urgency feels distant, subsumed into the deliberate click of a key. The telegraph operator pauses, brushing back a strand of hair from his brow. He glances at a small wall clock, its ticking single-handed movement marking seconds so fine that the difference between a dot and dash could hang on a breath. A curt knock at the door announces a messenger. A junior clerk enters, carrying a folded telegram sealed in striped telegraph paper. With a hushed bow, he hands it over. The operator takes up a steel letter opener, carefully slices the folds, and smooths the paper flat on the desk. He reads the contents, then dips his quill into a full inkwell and adds the notation, delivered to post office, AM mail, before tucking the telegram into a pigeonhole labeled with the district it must serve. Minute by minute, the telegraph room accumulates evidence of distant lives. There are messages from the manor houses of the countryside requesting fresh relay of funds. There are broken-hearted pleas from emigrants waiting abroad. There are brief, business-like cables confirming departure of steamships bound for Bombay or Melbourne. Something about the crackle of electricity and the rhythmic tapping carries an inevitable promise, that no matter the distance, voices may still reach one another. Outside the door, a new wave of clerks and parcel sorters drifts past like a slow current in a subterranean river. Their voices do not intrude here, instead, they accentuate the hush. In the lamplit fog of this small chamber, each transmission carries its own gravity. Pressing his fingertip against the key, the operator sends a confirmation back along the line. His code echoes the distant click of a fellow operator's key hundreds of miles away, both of them engaged in a silent conversation that spans counties and seasons. At length, the afternoon sun dips low enough to cast a slender beam through the frosted pane. Dust motes drift in golden strands. A final relay arrives, a short series of dots and dashes that, once transcribed and signed, require no further action until the next shift. The operator watches the tape roll up and slip into its tray, then lifts the brass cover of the telegraph key. He shuts down the relay keys one by one, each falling silent with a small, decisive snap. The hum of the batteries fades as he loosens a screw terminal and inserts a porcelain cap over the wire. With a final glance at the ledger, he extinguishes the oil lamp. In the sudden half-light, the room seems smaller, filled with the quiet presence of cables and keys and the vestiges of messages sent and received. Folding his hands across his waistcoat, he steps back through the oak door and into the sorting hall. Behind him, the telegraph room settles once again into waiting stillness, as though anticipating the next whisper of electricity that will bring distant voices back to life. The first warmth of the sun had begun to soften the sharp chill that lingered among the flagstones of the courtyard when the second mail coach appeared at the arched entrance of the post office. Its polished mahogany panels gleamed where morning light caught the varnished grain, the brass crest of the postal service glinted with a subdued pride. A hush fell among the clerks who had gathered by the curtained hatch, threads of dust drifting lazily in the new daylight, before the low rumble of iron-shod wheels resumed the rhythm of industry. It was as though time itself paused, breathing in the moment before the great exchange of letters would begin. Two powerful horses, their coats still damp from an early wash-down, stamped gently on the cobbles. Steam rose in vaporous spirals from their flanks, rising to meet the first gold fingers of dawn. The coachman, clad in a dark woolen coat that hung in precise folds around his frame, lifted one gloved hand, lined with leather warmed by the saddle, to his helmeted brow in acknowledgment of the awaiting postmaster. The horn propped at his side was silent now, a mere instrument of warning that had already served its purpose along the winding turnpikes. In the stillness, the soft munch of oats could be heard as the horses nibbled from a canvas feed bag fastened just behind the driver's seat. At the curtained hatch, two clerks stood at attention. Their caps, edged with silver braid, rested neatly atop their heads. The heavy woolen curtains, woven in subdued burgundy with an embroidered postal crest, were drawn aside in unison. The leather hinges creaked softly, and the slender shafts of light that spilled into the dim interior revealed rows of pigeonholes, ledgers, scales, and the polished counter they had tended since dawn. On the other side, a courier in a brass-laminated helmet dismounted with agile grace, tethering his horse to a wrought-iron post before stepping forward to assist in the transfer of mailbags. Each mailbag was more than a simple sack, it carried within it the hopes and anxieties of correspondents near and far. Some bore faint, familiar scents, parcels of dried lavender from distant fields, envelopes lined with scented lints for private musings. Others were redolent of coal dust and tar, the souvenirs of mining towns that lay beyond the hills. The courier unhooked the first of the canvas sacks from the inside of the coach, and the clerk reached through the hatch. Fingers brushed as mailbags changed hands, the soft cloth of each sack whispering secrets of the roads it had traveled. A light brass clip sealed each bag's leather drawstring, stamped with the official date and the station's crest. Behind the counter, the postmaster, tall and quietly dignified, leaned forward, his spectacles perched low upon the bridge of his nose. He ran a gloved thumb across each clip, scanning the embossing for any sign of tampering. Every twist of the seal, every impression in the metal, was recorded with seriousness. In a moment, suspicion could turn to forfeiture, in a slip of oversight, letters might be lost, stolen, or delayed. His ledger lay open before him, its pages filled with lines of looping script that accounted for every sack received and dispatched. With a measured breath, he nodded to the courier, who passed the mailbags inside. Beyond the hatch, the post office interior hummed with a low murmur. Clerks sorted the incoming bags onto wooden trolleys bound with iron rims, each wheeled across the tiled floor to the sorting alcoves. There, they peeled open the seals and extracted envelopes, postcards, and small packages, placing them in their respective pigeonholes by district or, in some cases, by individual delivery route. The rattling hush of flicked quills inked in blue and black accompanied the rustle of paper as addresses were verified, postmarks affixed, and routing slips attached. The air carried the combined fragrance of fresh ink and the faintly musky tang of leather. Outside, the coachman gave a discreet nod, and the horses relaxed their stance, sensing that their task was complete. The second coach, now emptied of its burden, would soon be reloaded with outgoing mail destined for yet another stretch of road. Later this afternoon, it would roll away under lantern light, carrying across the countryside the hopes of families expecting news and of townsmen awaiting wares long delayed. For now, however, it stood motionless, a silent sentinel at the mouth of the post office. The postmaster, tucking his quill behind one ear, rose and stepped through the hatch to convey a final instruction. The courier's brass helmet caught the sunlight as he listened attentively, the brim casting a small shadow across his uniform collar. The man's posture was respectful, yet not servile. He, too, was part of this unspoken tradition, this seamless exchange that had been honed over decades of honest labor. He lifted the hoof-polished straps of the saddlebags that lay at his feet, preparing to mount once more for the return journey toward the coach yard. A sudden breeze stirred the curtains of the hatch, and a loose coil of brown hair escaped beneath the helmet's back. The courier paused, sweeping the hair aside before raising his eyes to the postmaster's. In that brief encounter, no words were exchanged, but the mutual understanding was unmistakable. Safety, speed, accuracy, such were the virtues that guided them all within these walls. Even as horses and helmets whispered of motion, the post office itself seemed a realm apart, governed by the quiet perseverance of men and women who believed in the slow certainty of the postal service. The clang of iron on iron drew the clerk's gaze back to the door. The first mailbags had been placed in neat rows on the trolley, arranged by district names carved into small wooden labels: East Market, Fairfield Heath, Upper Dingle. Some sacks were larger, bound for group deliveries to local businesses, others small and delicate, addressed by hand to private citizens. Each bore the indelible mark of its origin, the postmark for the town whence it came, the date of dispatch, and often a secondary ink stamp indicating the route number or the name of the coach that carried it. Within the alcoves, the afternoon light slanted in through the tall windows, gilding the dust motes that swirled in the air. A clerk paused to close his eyes, breathing in the combined scent of hay, horsehair, and old vellum. He traced the fine grain of the wooden counter with a fingertip, recalling the morning stillness, the lighting of the oil lamps, the rustle of chairs as they readied the office for its daily charge. Now, in this mid-morning moment, the post office lived again in full pulse, as if the beating heart of the town itself had been inserted between these walls. Outside the hatch, the courier gave a final salute, mounted, and guided the horses toward the coach-yard. The second coach, its doors now closed and secured, rolled backwards onto the street. A pair of stable hands led the animals to a shaded watering trough, their straw-stuffed mangers emptying to acknowledge the upcoming journey of others. And within the station, the postmaster dipped his quill anew, inscribing the seals of each bag into the daybook, ensuring that every arrival was accounted for with the same care that had greeted the earliest letters before sunrise. Thus concluded the mid-morning dispatch ritual, as measured and precise as the chime of a clock tower. The horses slurped at their water, the clerks resumed their gentle hum of sorting, the postmaster's gaze moved from ledger to lantern to map upon the wall. In the stillness that settled after the brief flurry of activity, there lay the promise of continuity. Tomorrow would bring fresh riders, new seals to test, and another exchange of hopes. Yet, in this moment, the Victorian Post Office remained a bastion of patience, order, and quiet devotion to the art of conveying human thought across distances both small and vast. A hush descends upon the post office. The mid-morning bustle has subsided into a gentle murmur, spurred by distant carriage wheels on cobbles beyond the tall mullioned windows, the occasional whisper of a clerk consulting the rate tables, or the far-off click of telegraph keys shutting silent. In this quiet interval, the archivist's hour begins, its ritual as deliberate and unhurried as the turning of seasons outside. A junior clerk, Miss Prudence Hayward, removes her gloves and straightens the soft wool of her sleeve. She approaches a high oak shelf, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Bound volumes stand in neat procession, row upon row of pigskin and calf leather, each spine embossed in faint gilt with the year and month the ledger covers. She breathes in the tempered air, faintly scented with parchment, ink, and polish, and selects the earliest volume still awaiting proper catalogue, a ledger from the winter dispatches of 1872. With measured care she slides the heavy tome from its place. The bindings creak softly, attending her every movement, as though bestowing a final blessing. She carries it to a low table by the arched window. Sunlight wavers across its cover, illuminating swirling dust motes that hang suspended above the polished surface. She lifts the lid and finds the opening page inscribed in painstaking script, the clerk's quill strokes crisp and deliberate. Names of distant towns appear in the margin: Hartford, Newburyport, Dover, each followed by columns of arrivals and departures, tally marks in brown-black ink, occasional blotches where the inkwell trembled. Miss Hayward thumbs through the leaves, pausing at entries that require cross-referencing. An elderly gentleman wrote to a mariner bound for India. The parchment envelope, now brittle and yellowed, remains glued to the inner cover. She gently pries it free, careful not to tear the paper, and inspects the postmark. Her soft exhalation stirs the fine dust along the volume spine. She notes the date and destination in her own daybook, which lies open beside a steady brass lamp. The flame, tended only minutes ago, flickers like an attentive sentinel. Once the references are logged, she returns the volume to its shelf, this time guiding it into a newly numbered position, shelf 3, row B, slot 7, where it will stand ready for any future inquiry. Next to it she places a second ledger, now correctly labeled for the spring mail runs of 1873. Each action is deliberate: align the spine with its neighbors, set the volume flush against the wooden backboard, press gently until it clicks home. The rhythm is methodical. There is significance in this small ceremony. By preserving yesterday's records, she safeguards tomorrow's clarity. Beyond the ledgers, pigeonholes line the wall, hundreds of them, each lettered with embossed brass nameplates that gleam dully in the morning light. Into these slots she begins to slide the faded envelopes recently exhumed from storage. Some bear frugal scraps of paper pressed for posterity, the Earl of Bexley's request for expedited dispatch to Bath, a schoolmistress's humble plea for books to be sent to her pupils, a consignment of samples destined for a clothier in Manchester. Each shares space with its sisters, arranged chronologically by date of posting. The clerk's hands move slowly, reverently, as though each piece of correspondence carries the weight of its sender's hopes. Occasionally, Prudence reaches for a small pot of sealing wax set upon the table. She fits a slender taper into the silver snuffer's scissor blades, applies a light flame, then tilts a drop onto the freshly catalogued bundle. The wax spreads in a translucent crimson patina. With a brass seal bearing the postmaster's crest, hand-engraved years before, she stamps the wax, leaving a pressed impression of the crowned lion and fleur-de-lis. The latch on the pigeonhole secures with a faint click, the sound swallowed by the post office's vaulted ceiling. She rises to replenish the oil lamp at the far end of the room. The brass stand requires gentle polishing. She unfolds a square of soft cloth, dips it in a tiny pot of sweet almond oil, and begins to wipe down the lamp's curving form. Metal and cloth move in quiet partnership, every swipe drawing a small shine whirled back to life. Even the hinges of the cabinet doors respond to her ministrations, brightening at the edges and silently pledging years more service. A distant murmur heralds the arrival of another clerk. Mr. Gibbs, the telegraph operator, peeks in to confirm a cross-reference number before departing for luncheon. Prudence offers a polite nod, her attention never straying far from the neat lines she has drawn in her index. She records his query, Telegram Form 42A, filed under Dover, cross-reference, Volume 13, page 72. The clerk's eyes reflect understanding, and he slips away to join the midday break. The post office settles further into its lull. Outside, the gilded line atop the coach sign glints in the sun, the late morning coach bound for Salisbury soon to be loaded. But here, in the archivist's alcove, time moves more like the turning of a page than a galloping horse. Prudence pauses, resting her fingertips on the face of an old volume muslin-bound, its title long since faded, Military Posts, 1865 to 1870. She recalls the postmaster's words from last evening, how he spoke of each record as a thread in the tapestry of public service. Now she sees it clearly, a single misplaced letter or misfiled volume would unravel more than just paper records, it would compromise the trust of every citizen who entrusts their messages to this office. She tucks away that thought and proceeds to the lowest shelf. There she finds a bundle of trial records, letters returned for insufficient postage, whimpering appeals for refunds noted in tiny script, each marked under review. Now, with fresh eyes, she checks the postage rates once more, consulting the leather-bound tariff schedule perched on a nearby bracket. She corrects the final entry, signs her initials by the margin, and moves the bundle into the resolved pigeonhole, a clear division between past errors and present certainties. At last, the archivist's hour draws to a close. Prudence straightens her daybook, closes its covers, and places it on its designated shelf. She surveys the tidy rows of ledgers, the organized pigeonholes, the gleaming brass hardware. In this small domain of order, she feels a quiet pride. The daily labor of filing and record-keeping ensures that the vast machinery of the post office will continue to hum, each cog aligned and every letter traceable. A faint bell tolls in the distance, an invitation to midday respite. She replaces her woolen cloak on its peg, smooths her skirts, and exchanges a brief nod with the senior archivist, who emerges from the inner sanctum. The two share a furtive smile. Tomorrow the process will begin anew, but for now the office rests in perfect order, ready for the afternoon's tasks of parcels and telegrams. And so, with measured steps, Prudence Hayward leaves the archivist's alcove, confident that each record stands firm in its place, a testament to the enduring quiet dignity of her labors. A gentle hush settles over the post office as the sun reaches its zenith and the midday bell rings softly in the distance. The patterns of light, filtered through stained glass panels high above, carve muted mosaics onto the black and white checkered floor. At this moment, the ceaseless rhythm of stamping, sorting, and tallying pauses, and the entire staff drifts toward a modest side chamber, where an unassuming lacquered side table holds the promise of a brief, restorative pause. Here, Amid the lingering scent of parchment and ink, porcelain cups will be warmed and steaming tea poured, while the quiet companionship of colleagues eases the labors of the morning into memory. A porcelain teapot, decorated with a ring of delicate rosebuds, is set gently upon a braided silk mat. It bears a thin curl of steam that rises as if in slow, contemplative thought. Each attendant moves with practiced calm beneath the high windows. One holds the pot by its curved handle, mindful of the swing of its spout. Another waits with a tray of small, bone-chipped saucers. Their footsteps echo softly on the polished stone, creating a counterpoint to the background murmur of distant wheels and horses' hooves beyond the tall entryway. From the kitchen, a maid emerges bearing a wicker basket lined with embroidered linen. Inside rests a stack of freshly baked biscuits, golden at the edges, and still faintly warm. The biscuits are simple fare, flour, butter, and a touch of brown sugar, but their crisp sweetness has an almost ceremonial value. Each clerk takes one upon a small china plate, pressing fingertips to the warm underside before lifting it to lips that have grown accustomed to the sharper tang of ink. Crumbs fall, unnoticed, onto the tile beneath, soon to be brushed up by broom or duster at closing time. The postmaster himself relaxes into a sturdy wooden bench against the wall, the grain of the timber smooth beneath his coat sleeve. He tends the steeping teapot with the same measured care he applies to sealing dispatches. With a ladle-carved porcelain spoon, he lifts tea into a cup, careful to avoid any splatter. A clerk watches with a fond smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear before reaching for a biscuit, her eyes reflecting both the flicker of candlelight from earlier hours and the midday brightness that has replaced it. Conversation begins in quiet whispers, like the turning of pages in a leather-bound tome. They exchange word of simple things, a clerk's niece entering a drawing class in Bloomsbury, a recent delivery of coal that arrived late but warmed the hearth just the same, the persistent chirp of sparrows nesting above the carriage arch. There is talk of the cook's new pudding recipe, which had both pleased and perplexed the staff with its unusual blend of currants and grated nutmeg. Such domestic details carry weight here, carrying them beyond the ledger's columns and stamped seals into the realm of personal solace. Outside, the distant clip-clop of horses reminds them that they are suspended only briefly between two halves of a continuous day. A faint breeze drifts through a narrow window left ajar, bringing with it the faint aroma of the smithy's coal smoke and the damp scent of hay from a nearby stable. The wind stirs a fringe of lace at the window's edge and sends a wisp of steam dancing upward from the cups. Each inhalation of air feels like a promise, soon the afternoon hours will bring renewed purpose, but for now this moment belongs solely to rest. As staff sip tea, dark, amber liquid that clings briefly to tongues before slipping down warm throats, they are reminded of the empire's reach. Tea leaves traveled from distant provinces, carried by steamships and railways, then delivered here in small casks. They think of far-off plantations where morning mist shrouds rubber trees and planters crouch to pluck the tender shoots. Yet in this quiet alcove, geography contracts until the world becomes no larger than the circle of benches, the sturdy table, and the china that encircles them. Each biscuit is broken in half before being offered to a neighbor, a sign of shared goodwill. Hands brush as plates pass between them, and eyes crinkle in mutual understanding. In these minutes, the morning's precise ledger entries and the tremor of telegraph keys recede into the background. Percentages of weight and measures of postage yield to the simple mathematics of friendship and respite, as though the very wood beneath them disallows the intrusion of stress. Gentle laughter bubbles occasionally, as one clerk recounts a moment from the morning, the time the inkwell stopper popped in the heat, splattering paper nearly ready for dispatch. Another relates a brief exchange with a carriage driver whose horses had shied at a balloon drifting overhead, causing a minor conflagration of arm flaps and reins. Their descriptions are slow and deliberate, savoring each syllable as though it were another spoonful of tea. In the calm voices of these anecdotes, dawn's labors and mid-morning duties merge into a tapestry of human detail. The teapot's last precious dregs are turned out into the final cup, its porcelain interior now cool to the touch. Plates are collected, biscuits crumbs swept into hands before being flicked into a small, black iron bin. For a moment, all remains still, the staff seated with their backs straight, the side table absent of all but the faintest trace of steam. Even the sunlight seems to hesitate, pausing to settle its golden warmth more deeply into the tiles. In that brief, suspended breathing of the workday, the postmaster rises and moves toward the large central counter. Others follow as if guided by the hour's gravity. Each picks up a quill, straightens the daybook, arranges the next open ledger page. The calm of the tea room seeps outward, like tide returning to the sea. Returning to their posts, they carry with them the soft glow of midday, an ember of ease to warm the hours ahead. Already, a distant rattle at the front door hints at the afternoon's arrivals. Wagon wheels will bring wicker carts of parcels, and the telegraph key will once more click its urgent message. But for now, the day breathes easier. The checkered floor looks brighter for having held their quiet fellowship, the teapot's imprint still discernible in the memory of porcelain. And so, as they depart the luncheon alcove to resume mailbags and dispatches, they carry with them a small reserve of calm, a private inheritance drawn from tea, biscuits, and shared reverie in a Victorian post office at the heart of dawn's slow transition to high noon. A hush settles over the post office once more as the midday sun, having climbed past its zenith, softens toward afternoon. The brief clamor of tea cups and biscuit tins has faded, and for a moment the grand hall lies in a state of quiet repose. The postmaster, wiping his brow and straightening his waistcoat, glances at the tall clock on the east wall. Its pendulum swings with steady determination, marking the hour when a different kind of work begins, the handling of parcels and packages more cumbersome than a single letter or telegram. Beyond the broad oak counter, the heavy double doors creak inward to admit the afternoon cart, its wheels groaning on the timber boarding. The coachman, dressed in a dust-streaked overcoat, hat in hand, guides two uniformed bearers who balance a stack of wicker baskets and stoutly wrapped parcels upon an aging handcart. The air is cool beneath the high-ceilinged vaults, yet carries a faint scent of horsehair and leather harness. A slip of sunlight falls upon the cart's worn handles, their varnish smoothed by countless hands. The lead clerk steps forward. He dons a pair of thick gloves, brown leather, supple yet durable, and braces himself against the cart. With a soft grunt, he eases the first wicker parcel to the edge of the board. Its sides bulge unevenly, as though filled with heterogeneous contents, perhaps a rolled carpet, perhaps a coiled metal spring. Chalk numbering, 7A in looping script, models its surface. Carefully, he traces his gloved finger across the smudged digits, then nods to his colleague. Together, they slide the parcel onto a low table beneath a brass lamp whose wick glows amber. One by one, the wicker baskets arrive. Some bear the powdery imprint of flour sacks, bakers sending fresh dough across county lines, while others carry the faint musk of tanned hides. Between each basket cues a small pause, the clerk refers to the day's docket, reading aloud the destination and the sender's name. His voice is calm, practiced, as though reciting a familiar poem. Miss Adeline Forsyth, Forston Cottage, Oakshire. The other clerk, quill poised, records the entry on a folded sheet of parchment, the nib scratching softly. Meanwhile, at the far end of the hall, the parcel shelf stands ready. Its stout wooden beams bear metal reinforcements, each shelf labeled in gilded letters: North Coach, South Coach, Eastern Express, Local Delivery. The clerks lift each wicker parcel in turn, measure its dimensions against a carved rule inset into the shelf side, and chalk the recorded length, breadth, and depth onto the parcel itself. The chalk puffs faintly, a cloud of white that catches in a sunbeam as it drifts upward. A stout package arrives next, bound in coarse ticking and wrapped with greased twine. It is long and flat, likely a set of blueprints or a framed landscape. The clerk shifts the handcart, bringing its load closer, and gently lays the parcel onto the table. Carefully, he winds the twine tighter, knotting it thrice to secure its awkward bulk. The sound is a soft crackle of fibers. He affixes a printed label, bearing the date, weight, and rate, and stamps a wax seal to one corner, its deep red facsimile of the postmaster's cipher leaving an impression in the cloth. Beneath the vaulted ceiling, shafts of light catch on floating motes of dust, lending the scene an almost sacred stillness. The constant scratching of quills and occasional murmur of destination names compose a quiet symphony of midday industry. Across the hall, a junior clerk arranges rolled sacks of newspapers, each bundle tied with hemp cord and marked in tidy Roman numerals. He stacks them against the north wall, the cylindrical shapes rising like a forest of parchment scrolls. The first edition of today's Gazette takes pride of place at the top, its front page headlines still crisp with the morning's reports. Every so often, the postmaster's voice rings out, calm but authoritative, "Ensure the parcel for Milford arrives upon the 4 o'clock coach without fail." A clerk pauses, dips his quill into an ink well, and underlines the destination twice, signifying its urgency. He replaces the cap, snuffs the inkwell, and moves on to the next package. The measured pace is unhurried yet purposeful, each gesture deliberate as though part of a well-rehearsed ritual. Outside, the distant clatter of hoof-beats announces the arrival of a second cart, its driver calling greetings to the postmaster through the open shutters. More parcels, smaller this time, but numerous, are lifted through the half-open door. The hand-cart wheels protest in soft creaks as it rolls forward. One by one, these bundles of tobacco tins, metal tools cushioned in straw, and parcels of preserved fruit find their place on the sorting table. Tally marks are chalked on their sides, and the clerks slide them onto the appropriate shelf with quiet efficiency. An hour passes. The great hall, once empty after lunch, now flourishes with wooden shelves weighted down by packages of every shape and size. The brass lamp at the sorting bench shines brighter as the afternoon wanes, casting a warm pool of light upon parchment ledgers and quill-stained blotters. The postal clerk pauses for a moment, lifting his gaze to one of the narrow, arched windows. Beyond the patterned glass, the sky deepens to a soft gray, hinting at an approaching evening. He returns to his work, tying a final bundle of newspapers, then gently nudges it onto the shelf labeled "Local Delivery, Evening Round." At the sound of a distant bell, echoing faintly from the rear corridor, the postmaster announces the final grouping for the late-day coach. The clerks, now attuned to the cadence of the building, exchange nods and set to work reorganizing the parcels by departure time. The wicker baskets shift into neat columns, the flat, cloth-bound packages are aligned by weight, even the row of newspaper scrolls is rearranged to ensure the most urgent editions sit at the forefront. It is a quiet choreography, one that unfolds without grand speech or flourish, yet each movement is vital to the journey these parcels will soon undertake. As shadows lengthen, the last of the afternoon arrivals are logged, labeled, and stored. The postmaster moves among the rows, inspecting seals and double-checking the lists. A satisfied murmur escapes him, today's business is in order. Behind him, the clerks begin to sweep the floorboards, gathering stray chalk dust and straw fibers from the newspaper bundles. The once busy hall returns to a softer hum, as the staff await the final coach's arrival. In this gentle lull, one can almost trace the echoes of mornings past, the clink of oil lamps being lit, the soft rustle of letters sorted by district, the telegraph key's distant click. Yet now, in the calm after the afternoon's arrivals, the post office breathes with its own unhurried rhythm. Each parcel, marked and stowed, is a message of commerce, affection, and necessity, poised to rejoin the wider world beyond these storied walls. And so, with careful hands and quiet eyes, the clerks prepare for what comes next, the onward journey of every basket, bundle, and wrapped packet entrusted to this venerable institution. Thus ends the midday chapter of parcel sorting, the humble backbone of communication and trade in this Victorian relic. The stage is set at last for the evening's final dispatches, where sleigh-like coaches and lamplit platforms will converge to bear the day's labors into the dusk, and beyond. The light in the parcel department is gentler now, the mid-afternoon sun filtering through tall, narrow windows and striking the dust motes that hang, golden and slow, above stacks of wicker baskets and wooden crates. The bustle that greeted the arrival of heavy packages has subsided to a measured rhythm, each movement deliberate and quiet. As you cross the threshold into this corner of the Victorian Post Office, the scent of timber and twine mingles with the faintest trace of chalk and ink. There is no rush, only the careful work of measurement, labeling, and stacking, carried out with methodical care that might lull a weary mind to rest. At one end of the long counter, a clerk in a dark frock coat kneels before a parcel that measures nearly 2 feet across. He draws a slender ruler of polished mahogany along the warp and weft of plain brown paper, the chalk in his free hand making a pale mark where the length ends. Each chalk number, tall and precise, denotes inches counted in soft white against the earth-tinted wrapping. The clerk's fingers are steady, his breath nearly inaudible in the hush. He traces each measurement from end to end, along each axis, length, width, height, then moves on to the next parcel, as if each were a small vessel of secrets bound by twine. Beside him, another clerk has unfurled a sheet of adhesive labels upon the counter's worn surface. The labels lie in neat rows, their edges just curling upward from the polished wood. Each label bears a printed box in which the clerk will write the dimensions in cramped, looping Victorian script. The quill he dips into an inkwell of deep violet ink leaves a fine trail of letters and numbers, 24 times 12 times 6. He lets the ink dry before pressing the label firmly onto the parcel's papered side. The click and soft whump of label against paper is the only sound for a moment, echoing against the high ceiling. As parcels grow in number, they are sorted by the clerk according to size and destination. The smallest parcels, neatly shaped parcels wrapped in linen and marked for local delivery, are set aside on the lower shelves. Slightly larger boxes, bound for towns an hour's ride distant, occupy the mid-level rows. At the top, the broadest crates, heaviest and destined for the evening coach, rest beneath the slanted sunlight. The wooden shelves, aged and already bearing the weight of countless shipments, groan softly under the day's accumulation. You might notice how the light shifts across the room, touching key details in turn, the brass rings of the twine ball windows, where string is drawn taut before being slipped through a small iron clasp, the ledger where the clerk enters parcel particulars, weight, dimensions, destination, in columns inked with painstaking evenness, and the hammers neatly laid beside the stamping block, where the postmaster's seal will soon press red wax into place, a final mark of departure. Between tasks, the clerks exchange only the most muted of greetings. A low murmur drifts from one to another, an inquiry about how many parcels remain for delivery, or a reminder that the evening coach will arrive at dusk. Their voices are soft, as though mindful of the sanctity of this space. Here, each package is an emblem of hope, of urgent dispatch, of hearts carrying longing across distances. One might rest a hand upon a particularly heavy trunk and feel the subtle give of wood beneath fingertips, the sense that this is more than mere cargo, it is communication in tangible form. The postmaster himself makes an occasional circuit of the department, pausing to observe. He notes the evenness of measurements, the clarity of that looping penmanship, the precision with which each label adheres to its parcel. He lifts a crate, once marked, to Exeter, by a young hand, and inspects the chalk dimensions at its edge. Satisfied, he nods and turns, moving on to ensure that the shelves will bear the weight without falter. His footsteps, muffled on the worn floorboards, add to the gallery of quiet sounds that fill the room. On a side table stands a small cornucopia of tools, arranged with exacting order, rulers, chalk sticks, quills, labels, sealing wax, and stamps. A polished brass scale rests there also, although weight is seldom verified in this department, that task falls to the weighing clerk across the hall. Here, volume and dimensional accuracy are paramount. Still, the scale's presence serves as a reminder of the day's earlier labors, of letters and small parcels weighed against brass weights, of each precious message accounted for gram by gram. When a parcel is finally labeled and ready, it is passed across the counter to be recorded in the daybook. The clerk leans forward, dipping the quill once again into ink, and writes an entry that begins with the recipient's name and address, followed by neat figures, the chalk dimensions, and the assigned letter code that will guide the parcel through the next stages of its journey. The moment the quill lifts from the page, the transaction is complete, the parcel has earned its place among the others destined for the evening dispatch. Stacking the parcels is almost a ritual. The clerks bend at the waist, lifting each parcel with measured care, as one might handle a sleeping child. They place it gently onto the nearest shelf, making sure it sits squarely against its neighbors. As more parcels fill the shelves, the rows grow thick, and the shelves creak, protesting the new burden as evening approaches. In the hush, the sound of wood on wood, of paper on paper, becomes a lullaby of diligence. Outside, the faint clop of horses' hooves signals the coachman returning with news that the evening coach will soon be ready. Inside, the light dims as clouds pass across the late afternoon sun. A lantern is lit at one corner of the department, its wick crackling softly, casting long, dancing shadows over the stacked parcels. The staff pause, acknowledging the shift from day into evening, knowing that soon these packages will depart into the gathering dusk. Yet for this moment, the parcel department remains calm, a place where time slows, where measurement is worship, where the careful order of things becomes a source of quiet comfort. Each parcel, labeled and arranged, stands ready to carry its message to a distant hand. And as the lantern glows on the counter, illuminating chalk marks and inked entries, there is a sense that the night's journey is not simply a continuation of daily routine, but an ongoing testament to the steady pulse of connection that binds people across miles. Thus closes the chapter of measuring, labeling, and stacking, a chapter that holds the slow heartbeat of the post office at its busiest hour. Ahead lies the departure of parcels on the evening coach, the sealing of trunks for foreign steamers, and the final gathering of street mail before the day's end. But here, in this hushed alcove of the postal world, the careful art of dimension and label has its own quiet dignity, preparing each parcel for the long road to its waiting recipient. The first pale rays of dawn had scarcely begun to warm the high windows of the Victorian Post Office when the clerk for overseas correspondence stepped from the shadows of the sorting hall into the hushed stillness of the trunk room. A cool breeze sifted through a narrow transom above the door, stirring motes of dust in the narrow shafts of light that slanted across the polished oak floorboards. Here, the day's calm was punctuated only by the distant clip-clop of carriage hooves on cobbles and the steady ticking of a large brass clock mounted above the ship routes chart. Each morning, this small chamber gathered the letters and packets destined not for the county's villages or the neighboring county town, but for far-flung ports across stormy seas. From Dover to Bombay, from Liverpool to Sydney, each destination represented weeks or months of ocean crossings, cargo holds crowded with wool bales, sugar casks, and tin-bound mail trunks. The clerk paused beneath the great chart pinned to the corkboard, a tapestry of fine lines, each one tracing a shipping lane across the world's oceans. He pressed a fingertip lightly against the inked path of the peninsular and oriental steamer, noting that its scheduled departure was within the hour. A stout chest of dark camphor wood, bound in iron and bearing the stamped legend, "To Calcutta," occupied the center of the room. Its metal clasps glinted faintly in the early light, and the clerk knelt to examine the wax seal, running a gloved hand across the impressed crest of the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company. Gently, he broke the seal with a short knife, easing the iron latch. Inside lay bundles of neatly tied letters, their edges yellowed with the passage of time, each bound in coarse twine and secured with a paper band inscribed, "O25." The letters would travel by rail to the docks, be unpacked into the steamer's strongroom, and begin the weeks-long journey beneath towering smokestacks and across rolling swells. Straightening, the clerk set about his task with deliberate care. He drew from a small drawer an inkhorn of vermilion-tinted ink and an oblong quill, its fine point fashioned from a goose feather. Red ink was reserved for the most urgent departures, and on the smooth vellum cover of each trunk, he formed looping letters to note the sailing date and the vessel's name. SS Orania, March 10, he inscribed, the bright stroke standing out against the stained pine. He paused before sealing, recalling that the Orania, bound for Liverpool and thence beyond the Atlantic, would convey news of emigrants and colonial dispatches alike. Beyond the trunk stamp for Calcutta and Liverpool lay others, smaller but no less significant, a chest marked, Panama via Southampton, and a set of leather-covered cases bearing the name of an Australian line. The clerk moved among them, eyes flicking between the volumes of the captain's logs and the shipping gazettes laid open upon the table. He referenced the chart once more, verifying that each departure was recorded in the daybook. The pages of the ledger were ruled in crimson, and the clerk's own meticulous entries formed neat columns of port, date, vessel, and weight. A faint scent of salt water drifted through the room on the breeze, mingling with the aroma of old paper, camphor, and the faintest trace of ink. The beginnings of dawn carried a hush that rendered the routine almost sacred. In this quiet, the clerk reflected on the journeys these letters would undertake: stewards sorting mail in cramped gilt-paneled cabins, sailors hauling on lines in fog-bound nights, white-jacketed mariners standing watch at unfamiliar harbors. The correspondence he sealed here would cross oceans and deserts alike, uniting separated hearts, facilitating business deals, carrying news of births, deaths, and fortunes won or lost. A soft knock at the outer door signaled that it was time to dispatch the trunks. The clerk rose, smoothing his dark waistcoat and wiping a smudge of red ink from his thumb onto the hem. He collected a leather strap and affixed it around the first chest, fastening 2 tiny brass buckles with a careful click. On the doorpost hung a small indicator plate showing "Overseas Trunks, 2 docks," and he moved to adjust the plate to reflect "Ready." Moments later, the portly footman appointed to the docks arrived, carrying a lantern whose flame trembled as he stepped inside. Together, clerk and footman bore the trunks through the adjacent corridor, past the shelves of domestic parcels and the rows of pigeonholes still faintly echoing the rustle of letters sorted earlier. The postmaster, pausing at his ledger, offered a quiet nod of approval. In this vestibule, the smell of leather and the steady drip of oil from a hanging lamp accompanied their passage. At the end of the hallway lay the ramp that led to the waiting cart outside, a simple platform of rough-hewn timber, where daybreak's pale mist lingered in delicate tendrils. The trunks were loaded with care beneath the flickering glow of a lantern. The clerk took one last look at their destination stamps: Sydney, Cape Town, Valparaiso, each a promise of ocean swells and distant horizons. He returned to the chart room to cross off each vessel's name, ensuring the record book remained true. The lantern light cast long shadows across the chart's expanse of oceans and continents, Europe at its center, the New World to the west, and beyond the horizon, the mists of Asia and Australasia. As the cart rattled away, carrying the trunks toward the docks, the clerk lingered for a moment in the quiet corridor. Each chapter of the day's work had led him here, from the sorting of local letters at dawn to the sealing of overseas dispatches at mid-morning. Soon, the bustle of local deliveries and the post-box round would fill the halls once more. Yet in these earliest hours, the measured pace and solemn task of preparing letters for foreign seas felt like the heart of his profession, an invisible thread joining distant lives across the world. He closed the ledger with a soft sigh, setting his quill beside the crimson-tinted inkwell. The chart of shipping routes shimmered in the dim light, its lines reaching to every corner of the globe. Beyond the door, the first post-box round awaited, the clink of iron letters boxes ready to be emptied. But for now, the clerk paused in contented stillness, knowing that somewhere beyond the breakwater and the harbor lights, steamers stirred their engines, preparing to bear these sojourners of paper upon the great, rolling expanse of the sea. Well before the high sun gilds the rooftops of our modest Victorian town, the post-box round begins. The footman, his uniform modest yet pressed with care, steps from the glow of the post office's oil lamps into the narrow lanes. Beneath the sputter of gaslight and the whisper of dawn mist, he carries a stout canvas bag over a woolen shoulder, already lightly dusted with the grit of yesterday's roads. Each footfall on wet cobbles sends tiny echoes skating along the deserted street, and he pauses now and then, master of a small kingdom of silence. He approaches the first iron pillar box, paint peeling where countless hands have passed. The column stands sentinel beneath a faint haze of early fog, its presence so familiar that townsfolk scarcely note it. The footman sets down his bag, shoulders squared, and lifts the curved lid. The rusty hinge creaks, a low, welcoming groan that speaks of years of service, of letters exchanged between distant hearts. Lidded slot exposed, he brushes the narrow mouth with a hand-wrought feather duster. Each stroke lifts the grime of countless rain showers, so that no letter, no delicate fold of paper, shall be torn or smudged as it slips in and out. With a gentle lift, he withdraws the dustpan-like receptacle within, shaking its contents into the sack. One by one, aged envelopes, thin blue notepaper, and stout postcards tumble softly into the canvas. The footman's gloved fingers separate letters from postcards before they settle into the bag's wide mouth, ensuring that no accidental doubling, no lost missive in the morning's first haul, shall mar the day's work. He displaces stray feathers from the duster, tucks the tool beneath his arm, and secures the box's lid once more. A snap and a tug confirm the hinge's health, and he steps onward, lantern swinging at his side. He rounds the corner to a second post box, its red livery dim in the half-light. Dampness lies on the curved metal like dew, but the footman remains undeterred. He extracts a length of soft cloth from his coat pocket, using it to buff around the slot and the crown insignia above. His efforts reveal subtle ornamentation beneath layers of dust, the sculpted letters VR, signifying a realm beneath Queen Victoria's reign. A brief touch of irony flickers in his mind. The empire spans continents, yet here he stands, faithfully retrieving letters from beneath a hillside elm. As he works, the town sleeps on. A distant clock tower groans its half-hour chime. A carrier swans by with a lamp held aloft, they exchange a mutual nod, two vestiges of the same daily ritual. At the next pillar box, on a sheltered pavement near the lace-draped window of Mrs. Alden's boarding house, he lingers a fraction longer. If a letter from her daughter in Lancaster should reach its fold, he will see to its safe transport to the office with extra care. He lays a hand upon the pillar box as though conferring reassurance, an unspoken vow to unite sender and recipient. The footman's path traces cobbled alleys and brick-paved market squares, each collection point chosen for proximity to clustering residences. Where lamplight yields to growing dawn, signals of life stir, a baker's hearth glimmers behind frosted windows, a clockmaker's shop drapes a velvet cloth over its front display. Through the hush, each pillar box offers its secret cargo. With deliberate motions, he empties 5 in succession, the spring-loaded lids yielding to pressure, letters drifting forth in small cascades of handwritten hopes and obligations. The larger sacks of yesterday's late collections lie waiting here too. He unclasps thick cloth ties, folds the bulging fabrics into his bag, and relabels them for morning sorting. By the time 4 collection points have yielded their letters, the footman's bag is heavy. A film of moisture beads on his collar, yet his face remains composed. He pauses at the final box of his round, the one at the corner of Church Lane and Trafalgar Street. This pillar box bears the scrawl of countless messages from the local children, theater programs, drawings, even gossip scrawled on scrap paper. Beneath a small tin sign is fixed a boarding card, soliciting the public to address overseas mail well before the tide. He greets the box as a familiar friend, brushing the slots free of pigeon droppings and leaf litter. Then he lifts the heavy canvas bag's drawstring, gathers each envelope with careful deliberation, and swings the sack's weight onto his back. With the final circle completed, the footman retraces his steps toward the post office. The dawn mist has thinned beneath the advancing glow of lanterns lining the high street. Shop windows yawn open, a grocer arranges loaves of baker's crust on worn shelves. The mailbag, laden though it is, travels more swiftly now that the task is done. Within moments, the footman crosses the threshold of the post office. The air inside still holds the scent of lamp oil and parchment stacked upon polished counters. Beneath the steady glow of a central lamp, he lowers the bag onto a rough-hewn table. The commanding postmaster stands nearby, ledger open and quill in hand. A junior clerk hovers at the ready, clean smock clasped at the wrist, prepared to receive the day's first haul. The footman unclasps the bag's drawstring and appends its contents onto the muddled expanse of parchment and stamps. Letters spill like a pale wave, edges curling from the previous night's moisture. The clerk sets aside red-bordered dispatches, small blue inland sheets, and postcards on separate piles. Each stack is measured by thumb, counted once and again, and recorded in meticulous script. As the clerk tallies the number of letters gathered from each street box, the postmaster inspects the worn edges of envelopes, nodding at specimens neatly addressed, frowning slightly at poorly directed missives. He makes brief, looping entries in the collection register, date, time, number of items, and footman's name. The process is methodical and almost ceremonious, accompanied by the low scrape of quill on paper and the distant clank of the coachman harnessing horses for the next outward departure. Meanwhile, the footman stretches his shoulders and tucks the now empty bag beside a stack of fresh linen sacks. A second clerk approaches with a feather duster and a small pot of oil. Together, they proceed to tidy the immediate area, dust from the corners, oil applied to the hinges of each pillar box key, and a damp cloth sent around the letters racks. Even in these opening hours, cleanliness is held in high regard, for the slightest smudge of ink or tear of paper could threaten the letter's legibility, or worse, its sentiment. The collected letters now await further sorting, by district, by urgency, by destination. Perhaps some will journey to the nearby village beyond the rolling hills, others to the bustling port where steamships await. In the near hush of the sorting room, the footman stands back, lantern in hand, and watches as the day's first fruits of correspondence are laid out. He recalls his footsteps through the fog, the creak of iron lids, the glint of lamplight on polished mailboxes. This quiet round, repeated day after day, binds townsfolk in unseen bonds of affection, commerce, and obligation. The rhythm of the postbox round is both simple and profound. Beneath the heavy lid of each pillar box lies a promise, that voices separated by distance might speak again, that tidings of health, love, or farewell may traverse the miles. As the clerks prepare to sort the freshly gathered letters, the footman steps away, ready to take on the next duty of the morning. The stage is set for the mail to find its proper allotment, for the coach to bear parcels onward, and for the telegraph operator to tap messages anew. Yet in this still moment at the close of his round, the footman savors the hush between tasks, the gentle promise of connection carried in every folded sheet, and the quiet dignity of service that dawn bestows upon those who tend the vessels of human correspondence. The long shadow of the westering sun slants across the polished floorboards of the post office, where every beam catches a mote of dust lingering in the air. Clocks mounted upon the wall tick forward, each measured click a reminder that it is now past 4 o'clock. Outside, the clatter of carriage wheels has softened to a distant murmur, and within the solemn hush of the interior, a new urgency begins to stir. The mid-afternoon lull, so recently welcomed after the swarm of packages and the steady handful of letters, gives way to a sharper rhythm. The bell above the telegraph room door tinkles sharply, heralding the arrival of urgent dispatches. In the adjoining chamber, light from a tall mullioned window falls upon a broad desk, its polished surface littered with telegram forms, delicate strips of parchment, printed in vermilion ink, stacked in neat towers. Each form bears pre-printed fields, to, from, time, message, and, at the base, acknowledgement of receipt. Their edges glimmer faintly where the clerk's fingers have smoothed them, preparing them for swift transcription. Beside the piles of red-inked sheets lies a small inkwell, its lip darkened by repeated use, and a sand-filled tray to dry the freshly inscribed letters. The telegraph operator sits poised at the key, his seat drawn close so that his forearm rests on the tabletop rim. Wires from the brass jacks behind him stretch taut into the wall, vanishing into the hushed corridors that carry impulses across wires to distant stations. For a moment, he studies the form before him, then dips a pen into the inkwell and writes the name of the receiving office in precise block letters. Ink drips slightly at the nib, an inevitable sign of the haste that accompanies today's messages. Already, a low hum emanates from the battery box beneath the bench, punctuated by the occasional soft snap of the relay keys. With a gentle flick of his wrist, the operator turns to the ticker tape feed, cutting a fresh segment of thin paper. He threads it through the guide rollers, aligning it under the light of a shaded oil lamp. The lamp's flame flickers, casting dancing patterns upon the dark wood paneling, and the room seems momentarily suspended between the calm of an autumn afternoon and the electric tension of messages yet unsent. The operator takes a breath, glances at the clock, then raises his hand over the Morse key. His fingers descend in a measured staccato, sending dot-dash pulses that travel unseen along copper lines. Each stroke echoes in the quiet chamber, steady and unwavering. Another clerk stands behind him, scarcely breathing, ready to transcribe the received code onto a waiting form. The new telegram, from a distant railway station, speaks of a delayed engine, an urgent notice that must be delivered before the evening coach departs. As the final dash reverberates, both men exhale and the second clerk lifts the paper tape, smoothing it on the desk to read the message in full. Without pause, he copies the code into the telegram form, his quill scratching in formal script, arrival of goods train deferred till 6 o'clock. Instruct onward dispatch without delay. Where the message ends, he draws a thin line and signs his initials as clerk in charge. The first clerk folds the form, holds it over the lamp to ensure the ink has set, and slides it into a small wooden pigeonhole marked "Immediate Delivery." Already, the pile in that slot has grown tall, an assortment of private remittances, governmental bulletins, and commercial advisories, all clamoring for the swiftest conveyance. At the far end of the office, a courier pauses in his preparations. He stands by the tack racks, smoothing the leather of his saddle and cinching straps with practiced motions. The horse, a high-spirited chestnut mare, stamps once, eager to be on her way. The courier reaches into his coat pocket and draws forth a telegram form, pinning it carefully under the saddle flap, so that it will not flutter in the wind. He secures it again with a length of fine twine, knotting it tightly but cleanly, mindful that every minute counts. Behind him, the postmaster watches from the open door of the sorting room. In his hand, he holds a small brass bell, the signal to dispatch. He lifts it and gives it a single, commanding ring. Its clear tone echoes through the corridors, carrying an unmistakable summons. The courier nods in acknowledgement, settles into the saddle, and pushes the mare forward. Hooves strike the worn flagstones in a brisk clip-clop rhythm, first inside the dim hall, then onto the cobbled street beyond. Once the courier has vanished around the corner, the postmaster returns to the telegraph room to oversee the final preparations. He checks the remaining forms in the "immediate delivery" pigeonhole, ensuring each bears the proper receipt stub. He glances at a ledger open upon a side table, where each telegram is entered by time, dispatch route, and clerk's initials. With a swift flourish of the quill, he adds the latest arrival, for 12 p.m., 38 forms. 3 urgent. Dispatched by couriers. Check of confirmations due on return. The oil lamps that line the walls are now alight, their flames steady against the gathering dusk. A subtle warmth spreads across the room, softening the metallic click of the telegraph instruments. From outside, the last coach rattle and the calls of town criers grow faint as daylight wanes. Yet within these walls, a sense of purpose endures, messages carried forward on wires and hooves, bridging distances measured in both miles and hours. As the postmaster steps into the corridor, he pauses beneath a stained-glass transom and watches the glow of the lamp setting the mosaic panes aglow. He leans a hand on the cool stone sill, reflecting on the day's steady progress, from the dawn unlocking of the great wooden doors to this late afternoon rush of telegrams. In a few more hours, he knows, the evening coach will be loaded, the final messages tapped, and the post office will slip into its nightly repose. But for now, the cadence of urgent dispatches holds sway, a testament to the vital lifeline that these halls and wires and horses provide to every corner of the realm. So the late afternoon rush continues, the soft hum of batteries, the precise scratch of quills, the distant clip-clop of a courier's mare, and the measured tick of clock hands bidding the day onward. Each telegram delivered, each confirmation noted, carries with it a small triumph over distance and delay. And when at last the final message has gone forth and the batteries are stilled, the postmaster will pause once more to count the day's labors, content in the knowledge that another chapter of correspondence has been written across the silent wires of a Victorian afternoon. The late afternoon light had long since faded from the tall mullioned windows of the post office, leaving only pale streaks of dusk along the stone floor. Within, a single oil lantern swung gently from an iron hook overhead, its warm glow thrown unevenly against rough-hewn beams. The postmaster stood beneath its circle of light, breathing in the soft, resinous scent of burning oil, and listened to the distant clip-clop of horses on cobblestones. It was the hour when the final mail of the day was gathered, sealed, and entrusted to the night coach bound for distant towns, and every movement in the vaulted hall felt measured, deliberate, as though the building itself held its breath. A stout wooden table occupied the center of the sorting room, scarred by decades of penknife notches and ink spills. Upon it rested 2 large, canvas-lined trunks, their dark leather surfaces scuffed by rain and road dust. Around these trunks the clerks had clustered, a tall youth with a head of russet hair, a middle-aged woman in a tightly laced bodice, and a petite clerk whose spectacles caught the lantern light. Each carried a parcel or bundle of letters, tied with stiff linen tape and stamped with the official seal of the Victorian Post. The last customers had come at tea time to deliver their correspondence, a mother sending news to a son abroad, a tradesman forwarding his accounts, and a scholar mailing his manuscript to London. Now all remained to secure these tokens of human hope, sorrow, and longing for the dark journey ahead. The postmaster himself knelt by the nearest trunk. His gloved hands moved with grave care as he uncoiled a length of stout leather strap. Under his fingers, the strap was supple yet unyielding, deserving respect for the burden it must bear on the coach roof. The lantern cast his shadow tall against the wall, and he paused to cut the strap's end at a precise angle, so that it might slip neatly through the brass buckle. No rushiness was allowed in this final ritual. A loose strap could cost a parcel its safety, or allow letters to flutter away like autumn leaves. Above him, the coachman, a broad-shouldered man in a heavy greatcoat and high boots, stooped to inspect the leather hinges of each trunk. He turned one latch between finger and thumb, tested the catch, and whispered to himself as though consulting an old friend. His weathered face, framed by stubble, reflected half light and half shadow. His keen eyes betrayed neither hurry nor fatigue, only exacting attention. When a hinge resisted, he applied a drop of oil, wiping away the excess with a scrap of linen, and moved on without a word. Even now, while the world outside slipped gently into night, the coachman embodied the steadfast discipline of the road. The trunks had been labeled earlier that day. A clerk in neat copperplate script had inscribed each destination upon a stitched canvas placard: Lichfield, Whitby, Brambleton, and so forth. These bluish plaques fluttered slightly at the trunk handles as a mild breeze drifted in when the door had opened for the coach's arrival. Now, with the lantern's flame steady, the placards glowed like tiny screens, announcing the route each trunk would follow once hoisted onto the coach roof. One by one, the postmaster secured the straps. He threaded the leather through the buckles, then tugged until each trunk sat immovable. Leather creaked softly under tension, brass buckles clicked, and the trunk lids murmured their assent. From time to time he stepped back, squinted at the alignment, and crouched again to draw the straps tight. The youth clerk watched, absorbing these motions as if learning a secret rite, though his cheeks were flushed with the exertion of carrying heavy bundles only moments before. Outside, 2 bay horses stamped in their collars, their breath curling in invisible plumes under lantern light. The coachman paused from his hinge inspection, gave them a gentle word, and patted each flank. A distant hoofbeat answered, as if the horses urged him to finish. Within the dim hall, their presence lent a living rhythm to the scene, subdued impatience, a promise of boundless mileage to come. Meanwhile, the woman clerk stood at a small side table where a coil of tarred rope lay ready. She picked up a coil, unwrapped its end, and prepared to lash the trunks to the coach roof's slatted platform. Her movements were rhythmic and sure: rope around strap, rope under platform beam, tight knot looped twice, then firmly drawn. Each trunk received this treatment, for lines of rope binding it fast, each knot dressed and tucked so that no slack remained. Beneath her hands the rope fibers rasped, and the smell of tar mingled with the lantern's mild smoke. As this final binding took shape, the postmaster retrieved a small wooden mallet and a stack of wooden letter boxes intended for use during transit. These boxes, about the size of a shoebox and varnished dark brown, were stamped with the coach number and affixed beneath the seat where the guard could address urgent dispatches en route. The mallet tapped each box briefly to settle its hinges, and the postmaster smiled at the crisp, hollow ring, a small sound amidst the hush, yet eloquent in its assurance that all was well secured. A sudden clatter at the rear door announced the coach's approach. The youth clerk shot a glance toward the curtained archway. Through the heavy drape of canvas, lantern light glowed in an even brighter pulse. The coach's broad wheels ground to a halt on the cobblestone, and the horses let out low snorts. The coachman stood erect, uncoiling his whip by the shaft, and nodded once to the postmaster. That single nod carried the weight of countless journeys begun and concluded at this very threshold. The postmaster rose slowly, dusting his knees, then drew the final lid latch shut. He stepped aside as the coachman, with one smooth motion, unhooked the iron clamp securing the trunk to the carriage roof. Under the coachman's careful hand, the trunk slid onto the slats, and the ropes were tightened once more. A second trunk followed the same choreography, heavy but obedient under the shared effort. When the last trunk had found its place, the coachman surveyed his load. The lantern's glow revealed trunks sealed, straps tensioned, ropes immovable. Satisfied, he replaced the clamp, secured the final buckle, and stood back. Inside the sorting room, the clerks watched in respectful silence. Then the postmaster approached the coach door, lifted the canvas flap, and drew the curtain aside. He met the coachman's eyes through the narrow aperture. No words passed between them, yet the meaning was clear: the mail was ready, the night long, and the responsibility absolute. The coachman nodded again, whispering a muted "Godspeed," and closed the canvas. With a muffled crunch of hoofs and the wheel's measured roll, the coach eased forward. Lanterns swung at its corners, casting shifting arcs of light along the walls. The postmaster watched until the coach turned the corner, its lantern glow shrinking to a single moving star. Then he turned back into the gentle gloom of the post office, the hush of departure lingering like a benediction. A final hush enveloped the hall. The youth clerk exhaled, wiping his brow, and the woman clerk replaced the coil of rope upon its hook. The postmaster paused beneath the lantern, tracing the letters of the day's ledger with a fingertip. Every entry, from dawn's first pre-light rituals to this solemn evening dispatch, lay recorded in precise script. Tonight, as the stars blinked awake beyond the windows, the last mail of the day began its silent voyage across country lanes, while within these walls a quiet watch would continue until the final telegrams were tapped and the great doors locked once more. In that stillness, the dignity of their labor settled gently upon each shelf, each trunk, each coil of rope, awaiting the morrow. A gentle hush falls over the telegraph room as dusk deepens outside the mullioned window. The pale glow of a single oil lamp, trimmed and burning steadily since mid-afternoon, casts a pool of mellow light upon the polished mahogany desk. The hum of distant voices in the main post office has dwindled to a faint murmur. Only here, in this adjacent alcove of brass instruments and spools of paper tape, does a lingering echo of busy signals linger. The air is warm with the scent of hearth smoke and faint ozone, a lingering whisper of the last dots and dashes that have just passed through the copper wires stretching beyond city walls. Upon the central desk rests the telegraph key, its iron base bolted securely, its gleaming brass arm poised in momentary stillness. Nearby, the battery boxes, each lined with lead plates and brimming with sulfuric acid, stand silent, their lids ready to close with a solemn click. A spool of paper tape, threaded through the receiving mechanism, bears the day's final message in a row of unbroken dots and dashes. It dangles loosely, its unspooled length curling like a winter vine, waiting to be carefully cut and rolled smooth for filing. The operator, worn fine leather gloves removed and laid aside, releases a drawn breath. He pauses at the edge of the desk, gaze drifting from the coiled wires on the wall to the ornate clock over the doorway. The clock's second hand hovers near the top, counting down the final minutes before the official close. Outside, a late postman's tread passes by the shutters, as he crosses the hall toward the coach office. Steady, measured. A final delivery, perhaps, for the night coach bound northward, yet another heartbeat in the quiet machinery of communication. At precisely 6:30, the operator lifts a penknife, its blade nestled in a leather sheath, and approaches the spool of paper tape. With careful precision, he snips the tape beyond the last printed dash, then rolls it into a neat cylinder. Each slot in the filing cabinet awaits its own message: domestic updates, commercial bulletins, urgent notices from country towns. The last telegram of the day bears news of a harvest ship delayed by fog off the coast. Its arrival will now slip past midnight. With a soft scratch of quill on parchment, the operator inscribes the reference number upon the margin and tucks the rolled tape into its designated pigeonhole, assuring it a secure home until tomorrow's dispatch to the archives. He straightens, placing the filing cabinet drawer gently closed. With deliberate calm, he reaches for a cotton rag, lightly dampened with naphtha. Slowly, almost reverently, he cleans the telegraph key, wiping away the faint sheen of perspiration and the residue of carbon marks left by countless signals. The brass springs gleam anew beneath his touch, ready for the next morning's first tap. The parchment of the rate chart on the wall is smoothed, stray cobwebs brushed away. An empty spool sits near the receiving device, its flanges wiped of ink smudges. His movements are unhurried, as though each gesture were part of a ritual passed from one operator to the next, across decades of service. He steps to the battery boxes and, on cue, lifts the wooden lids with a soft click. The acid vapors rise briefly, curling as if reluctant to let go of their silent power. With gloved hands, he unfastens the small brass latches, and one by one, the circuit is opened. The telegraph key falls into its rest position, the last electrical pulse fades from the line. The humming quiets. The snap of relays in the nearby switchboard ceases. In that single moment, the wires themselves seem to sigh, as if in relief, free at last from the steady stream of Morse. The oil lamp flickers as a draft stirs the room. Beyond the window, the sky has deepened to indigo, and the first evening star glimmers faintly. In the silence, the operator draws a protective cloth cover from a drawer lined with felt. He drapes it over the telegraph key, its leather edges muffling the brass beneath. Each fold of the cover settles over the lever and the coil, obscuring the instrument until it is needed once more. This final act signals both the end of the day's coded conversations and a promise that tomorrow, with the breaking of dawn, the key will rise again to bridge distances, carry tidings, and tether hearts. For a long moment, he stands in stillness before the desk. His reflection, doubled by the glass of the switchboard panel, gazes back at him, a quiet sentinel at the threshold between day and night. The telegraph room, for all its mechanical trappings, has an almost sacred hush, a sanctuary of transmission, where thoughts and orders found their echo in an invisible current. Once, in the age of horse riders and steam coaches, this room would have represented the cutting edge of news and commerce. Now it slips towards communiques exchanged by telephone and, soon, electric traction in the streets beyond. Yet here, for these final hours of each day, it remains a vital passage. Turning away, the operator lifts the oil lamp in one hand and closes the door softly behind him. The hallway beyond is dimly lit by lanterns hung from wrought iron brackets, each flame steady but low. He walks with measured steps back to the main office, where clerks still tally parcels and a custodian readies brooms. The chime of the closing bell is not far off. His ritual complete, he offers one last glance toward the telegraph room's heavy door before slipping the key into his pocket. In the corridor, muffled by thick timber, he can already sense the shift in atmosphere. The pace slows even further. Paper-stained desks await cloths and quills await capping. The final mail trunks are sealed under lantern glow. Soon, the windows will be shuttered, and the counters will grow dark. Everything will come to rest until morning reawakens the stone floors and jars the oil lamps to life once more. Yet for this brief interval, the telegrapher carries forward the weight of invisible messages now at rest. He pauses near the archway leading to the sorting hall, inhaling the lingering aroma of ink and parchment, of horses' manes flicked by smithies and of coal dust settling over mailbags. He knows that in a few moments, the staff will gather tools for sweeping, that the postmaster will count coins by a single lamp, that the final echoes of a day's worth of letters and parcels will settle into the ledger's leaves. And when the closing bell rings, he will step aside, content that he has delivered the last the final dash. The machinery of wires and circuits will sleep, awaiting the patient coming of dawn. For now, the post office breathes easy, muffled in oil lamp light and the muted ticking of a clock telling its own Morse of seconds. Tomorrow, with daylight, the key will rise again, and the silent conversation will resume. But at this hour, an in-between moment of quiet and expectancy, the telegraph room stands sealed, its language of light extinguished, its last signals at rest. The final telegrams have been sent, the instruments hushed, and the night is allowed at last to settle upon the silent wires. The last echoes of footfalls have faded from the vaulted lobby even as the post office still breathes its lingering warmth. A pale glow through the tall windows reveals the wooden counter streaked with ink and dust. Outside, the fading day's light softens the faces of stone pillars, and the hush that precedes lockup settles gently among the polished brass and weathered oak. This is the hour of closing preparations, when every surface is touched, every tool stowed, and every tally recorded, an intimate ritual observed by clerks and postmaster alike, as if the very building itself exhales in relief at the thought of rest. Cloth napkins dampened with warm water and scented with a hint of vinegar glide over the ink-spattered desktops. Fingers trace each scratch or blot, lifting away the finer grains of grit that have drifted in on drafts all day. The quiet scraping of cloth against wood resonates like a hushed apology to every letter that passed across these counters. One clerk works methodically, wiping in the same direction from one end to the other, ensuring that no dark stain remains to mar the first light of dawn. The delicate craftsmanship of the timber, once gleaming beneath oil lamps, reveals every grain as it is coaxed back to life by the clerk's careful ministrations. Nearby, a second clerk kneels by the base of the sorting desk, broom in hand. The bristles are stiff from use, but still bend with a gentle grace around the scuffed floorboards. In long, sweeping strokes, the broom gathers dust motes that have drifted into corners, around legs of chairs, across floor registers where mice have scurried unseen. The clerk pauses now and then to brush these motes into neat heaps, mindful not to miss stray scraps of paper or string that might hamper tomorrow's mail cart. Each motion is deliberate, measured, as if woven into the very fabric of the post office's daily cycle. On a low shelf, candlestick holders stand sentinel, their brass sides dulled by soot and oil. A clerk lifts them gently, tipping out the last drips of thick, amber oil that have pooled overnight. The holders clatter softly against the wooden shelf as the oil trickles into a metal basin below, the sound sharp in the hush. One by one, each wick is coaxed free of its socket, trimmed to a neat nub, then placed aside for sharpening at the next dawn. The clerk's hands move with an unhurried precision, each holder cleaned of residue and dusted until its surface glints faintly in the lamplight. When the task is done, the brass items, polished, empty of wick and drips, sit ready for refill at first light. The postmaster remains at his desk under the sole glow of a single lamp. Its circle of light throws the rest of the office into soft shadow. He draws a deep breath and turns to the day's collection of coins. They lie in a small wooden tray, grouped by denomination: copper farthings, silver halfpennies, pennies, and dimes that ring against each other when moved. Each coin bears the profile of Her Majesty, her countenance mirroring the steadfast calm of the office itself. The postmaster's fingers sort through them deliberately, counting and recounting, his ledger open to the page for final receipts. Quill poised, he dips the tip into a well of dark ink, and a precise line of script records the day's total. The scratch of quill on paper is soft but resonant in the stillness, like the slow ticking of a timepiece. As the totals are confirmed, the clerks gather at the counter. A low murmur passes among them, an assessment of the day's tasks completed, a glance toward tomorrow's schedule, and then silence. Each knows the steps they must follow before turning away. The broom stands against the wall, its bristles silent now. The cloths lie folded upon the shelf, still damp with cleansing solution. The postmaster leans back, his high-backed chair creaking as he straightens his jacket, mindful that the final moments of the day demand one last check of every drawer and pouch. With a soft clang, the postmaster rises and crosses to the window. He pulls aside the linen curtain, half drawing it to study the sky. A sliver of pale moon hovers above the rooftops. There is time enough yet for the lamps to be extinguished and the keys to be turned. The hush feels sacred now, like the moment before a congregation stands to leave a chapel. He tucks the curtain back and turns to his clerks. "All is in order," he says, his voice low and steady. One clerk retrieves the key ring from beside the ledger. The heavy brass keys hang from a ring polished by countless hands. One key will secure the main door, another will lock away the day's cash until the bank messenger arrives in the morning. With solemn grace, the postmaster follows the clerk down the marble-lined corridor to the door. Yet before they leave the interior lights, a final duty remains. Back at the main hall, the postmaster lifts the lamp's glass chimney, tilts the wick into the holder, and listens to the faint hiss of oil as the flame flickers out. A gentle puff of smoke rises, then subsides in the growing half-darkness. The clerk draws the other lamps one by one beneath covers of dark velvet, muffling their light until only the moon pours in through the windows. The great hall of the post office stands now in muted silhouette, racks of empty pigeonholes staring blankly into the gloom, the counters glimmering faintly in the silvery glow. In the muted hush, the door's lock clicks into place. Outside, the lamplighter may soon pass by to ignite street lamps, but here within these walls all is still. The postmaster fastens the bolt from the inside, then tests it firmly. A final glance surveys the blotter book, the ledger, the empty coin tray. He closes the ledger with a soft thud and slips it onto its shelf among the bound volumes of days past. The key, large and cold, rests heavy in his palm. At the threshold, he pauses. Behind him, the post office stands quiet as a sleeping beast, its daily rhythm stilled. Ahead, the night lies silent under a canopy of stars. The postmaster's breath is even, measured. With a decisive turn, he withdraws the key and locks the door. In the hush that follows, a single echo lingers, an echo of industry, of letters carried, of messages sent and received. It is the final note of the day's work, left suspended in the cool night air. So ends the closing ritual, counters wiped clean, floors swept bare, lamps extinguished, and cash secured. Tomorrow's dawn will bring oil lamps lit anew, bags of letters to inspect, and the familiar melody of the opening bell. But for this night, the work lies complete. Here, in the vaulting calm of the old post office, the staff depart one by one, leaving only the faintest signs of their labors, a single lamp extinguished, the echo of a key in the lock, and the restful promise of a new day yet to come. The massive oak door closed with a deliberate finality, the iron bolt sliding into place with a low, resonant click that seemed to linger in the cool night air. For a moment, the postmaster's hand rested on the cold metal, as though reluctant to surrender the day's steadfast routine. Beyond that threshold lay a hushed sanctuary of empty counters, overturned chairs, and extinguished lamps. The corridors were stripped of the steady murmur of voices and the steady shuffle of boots upon stone, transformed now into a vaulted silence that breathed with the measured pulse of the building itself. Moonlight filtered through the mullioned windows, pouring in pale ribbons that cleaved the darkness in graceful arcs. Each beam landed upon polished wood and ironmongery, tracing the fine grains and subtle imperfections shaped by decades of daily touch. The counters, once swept clean of ink and dust, reflected a soft glow against the rough brick walls. Here, the fleeting dust motes drifted like ghostly syllables of letters long since delivered, pausing in midair before gently drifting earthward, as if heedless of the world beyond these stone walls. At the far end of the hall, the ledger lay open upon its brass-bound desk, pages edged in gold and marbled with the imprint of countless quills. Ink-dried lines nestled between ruled borders, each entry a quiet testament to the incomparably small joys and sorrows carried in each letter, a father's loving address, a merchant's hasty note, the occasional scrawl of a jest sent to uplift some lonely spirit. The postmaster paused before shutting the covers, fingertips brushing the text, as if momentarily transported into the chronicle of lives woven together by the postal threads. Outside, the late summer breeze stirred the copper spire atop the post office, and a distant night watchman's call echoed over cobblestones polished smooth by years of footfall. In that call was a promise, that even in slumbering hours, the world kept turning, seasons shifted imperceptibly, and word would again travel on pressed pages and stamped envelopes. The postmaster breathed deeply, tasting the night's cool hush, and allowed memory to travel backward through the day's unfolding scenes, from the morning's first lantern-lit ignition of oil lamps to the afternoon's tepid sunlight warming shelves of trunk-bound parcels. He recalled the telegraph room, where the rhythmic clatter of dots and dashes had once punctuated the humdrum of routine. In that cramped chamber, the operator's fingertips tapped out urgent tidings, news of births, of lost sheep, even the slender hope of promotions whispered across a wire. At sundown, the final electric spark had ebbed, leaving only the charmed silence of shadowed walls before the tide of lantern-lined shafts returned. Now, the memories felt distant, as if he watched them through stained glass, the colors muted but the outlines still clear. A hush settled, broken only by the soft creak of floorboards underfoot as the postmaster moved toward the back store. Here, shelves held rows of leather pouches and wicker baskets trimmed in twine, all emptied now of their daily burdens but still resonant with the weight of trust placed upon them. Each morning they would cradle letters bound for distant hamlets, each night they returned in silent testimony to journeys completed. He ran a gloved hand along the surface of a basket handle, feeling the worn texture of braided wicker warmed by day's sunlight. He paused by the pillar box display, an object of decorative pride trimmed in flaking scarlet paint. In daylight, the row of miniature replicas had drawn the eye with their curbside fervor. Now, under the ghostly wash of moonbeams, they stood like sentinels guarding both memory and promise. Each slot had drawn letters from the well-thumbed crowd of passers-by, eager to unburden thoughts, sometimes in triumphant hope, sometimes in trembling confession. He remembered the hush of sorts boarding the cloth sacks, the gentle heft as they shifted beneath the weight of human hearts. Returning to the main hall, the postmaster noticed that every brass fixture he and his team had polished at day's end gleamed black against the pale light, like distant stars winking in a boundless sky. He ran the palm of his hand over the surface of a lamppost holder, recalling the meticulous care taken each dawn and dusk, trimming wicks, refilling reservoirs, striking the flint to coax forth a steadfast flame. In the half-remembered flicker of that flame lay the promise of continuity, of tireless attention paid to the smallest duties. Stepping toward the ledger once more, he drew a slender bookmark of ribbon, closing the volume with a sense of quiet reverence. The clasp snapped shut, sealing another day's account in its brass-bound embrace. He placed the key for this cabinet on a hook overhead, alongside others that unlocked cupboards of stamps, boxes of envelopes, and drawers of rate tables. In the stillness, that little key shone like an object of ceremony, simple but ritualistic, embodying the trust of every letter penned, every parcel entrusted. The silence deepened, and the postmaster stood beneath the high, arched ceiling for a moment longer, listening to the subtle breath of the building. It seemed to exhale in low, sonorous tones, as though content to rest after fulfilling its daily purpose. Outside, a distant clock struck the hour, its distant sonance reverberating through darkened lanes. No footfalls answered, no horses stamped in impatience. The world had fallen into a deep, patient slumber, awaiting tomorrow's fresh sunrise and the return of that familiar bustle. At length, the postmaster turned away, descending the short flight of stone steps that led to the lower store. There, he extinguished the final lamp, guided once more by the faint glow of moonlight. The wooden floorboards released a single creak, as if bidding farewell to a companion. He locked the heavy door with a practiced hand, each turn of the key deliberate, each movement slow, as though imprinting the moment onto memory. The echo of that solitary click was the bookend to a day devoted to the unassuming dignity of service. Outside, the night was deep and endless, the Victorian streets resting beneath a quilt of silvered shadow. Yet within the postmaster's breast, a quiet warmth flickered, an understanding that every measured action, every meticulous record, had contributed to something larger than any single individual. In each letter delivered and each seal inspected, the threads of distant lives had been brought closer together. And though the office lay dark and still, it stood ready to awaken once more, to lend its steadfast quietude to another day's unfolding story.